This is Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily with Andrew Hustler Paterson and Michael Remis.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Hope you had a great weekend. Welcome to a Monday edition of Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily and what should be a very, very busy week on the sports scene in the PEG. And on the program, of course, the Commissioner, Gary Bettman, in town tomorrow. We'll get into that. And all of the feedback we had from Friday's show with Chris Johnson on. Certainly there were a lot of Jets conversations about what was happening on the ice and off the ice around the city and province over the course of the last few days, and we'll continue those conversations right here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. We're going to do it with Shawn Reynolds. Looking forward to having Rennie jump on the program. He and Kenny with a couple of interesting post-game shows this weekend against two of the lower teams in the league. The Jets won. They got the 2 points. Style points maybe weren't there as much, but we'll find out how Rennie's feeling, and as well as all of you in the chat with your thoughts on the Jets getting the 4 points, which what they set out to do, and now staring ahead at the Blues tomorrow night in a huge game in Dallas on Thursday, which could very well be for first place in the Central Division. We're also going to talk with Jeff Hamilton. And listen, there's lots going on to talk to Jeff about. We will hit the story out of the Canadian Football League that I know he's been all over with this lawsuit against the Toronto Argonauts and the status of Chad Kelly moving forward. And Jeff, being someone that's covered all Winnipeg sports for a long time, I know is going to have some opinions on what's going on with the Jets as they look to regain that foothold here in Winnipeg with a healthy season ticket base that has eroded over the last couple years. So Hammer and Rennie on the program today. And then later on, we're going to bring on, and I already see some people in the chat fired up about this. You know him as Al's brother from Overdrive, Michael Distefano, who is a multi-talented individual. He brings the tremendous information on Overdrive. He also hosts the Locked On Leafs podcast, but don't worry, we won't be talking about the Leafs. We'll be talking about the unprecedented sale of that case of 1979-80 O-Pee-Chee hockey cards, which was found in storage in Regina, Saskatchewan, which went for almost $5 million Canadian at an auction over the course of the weekend. So it should be a fun conversation. We've obviously loved having O-Dog on in the past and Brian Hayes. It was about time we got AB on the program. But we'll focus in on the Jets. And maybe right off the bat, we'll talk Scotties. What a performance by Rachel Holman and an incredible end to the run of Jennifer Jones. But just before we do that, a big thanks to the sponsors that make Winnipeg Sports Talk happen each and every day. The gang at Princess Auto, Coolbet Canada, Little Brown Jug, F Apparel, Wallace & Wallace, the Winnipeg Jets, Royal Sports, Boston Pizza, Sport Manitoba, Modern Man Barbershops, Manitoba Battery, and of course the gang at Canadian Club. Looking forward to seeing all you whiskey lovers to enjoy and sip and learn about some great whiskey and watch the Jets and Dallas Stars Thursday night at the Manitoba Sports Hall of Fame. But as we welcome everybody in chat, what's going on? Hit that thumbs up button and the subscribe if you haven't already. By the way, thanks to everyone. We are now officially at 11,000 YouTube subscribers, on to 12. And welcome in Michael Remis. Remo, what's going on?
Yeah, feeling good, Huss. It was great to have 2 Jets wins because we got into some conversations on Friday that had the comment section all heated up. I had some serious anxiety over the weekend, having to moderate it and keep the chat, keep the comments clean. But yeah, a lot of discussion, a lot of opinions on off-ice stuff. But as far as on-ice, 2 wins, maybe process not what you'd want to see. But hey, for a team that couldn't score on the power play and certain guys weren't going, we saw Ehlers get on the board with 2 on Friday after all the talk on Friday about him not being able to score. And again, power plays on a heater. So they're winning. And hey, look, time to look at the standings again. As first in the Western Conference when you sort by points percentage. So, it's still pretty good stuff here from the Jets. Look to keep it going, but maybe make things look a bit better, a bit cleaner on 5-on-5.
I'll say this. I'd far rather be talking about a team that didn't play their best that won.
Yes.
As opposed to a team that, was playing pretty good, but just not getting the results, because I've said it a million times, this is a results-based business. And it's an 82-game season. The wins and losses come in many different ways. And I think what's been most important over the course of the last 2 weeks is the Jets righted the ship after a 5-game winless streak. I believe they're now, 6 wins in their last 7 games. And it is amazing. If you would have told me, dude, that let's rewind to 3 weeks ago, just before I went away for that week, with where the power play had been and how many points we had said that it probably cost the Jets in games so far this season. To think that the Jets are on a heater right now in the standings on the back of the power play would have almost been inconceivable, especially in a game last night, and we'll get to it, without Sean Monahan, who was in a lot of ways the catalyst of that. But the power play has emerged in a huge way, and you can argue that it right now is carrying the Jets. Certainly not the 5-on-5 dominance that we've been accustomed to seeing for the majority of this hockey season.
Yeah, 8 power play goals in a 5-game span. And that week you were away, it was like, oh, the power play. How are they going to fix this? Like, should we believe them? Like, it's been terrible all year. And that weekend, starting the weekend against Vancouver, they went nuts on the power play. Oh, Gabe Vilardi hadn't scored. He hadn't had a point in 5 games. What's going on with him? And he's been on a heater now. 10 points in his last 5 games. And all last week, Nikolai Ehlers, how about his line mates? I think that we can still have discussion about that, but he hasn't had any points in a while. What's going on with Ehlers? Is he hurt? And we had heard he was under the weather and game time decision for Friday, and doesn't even need teammates on Friday. Just took it end to end and snipes past Mrazek. Oh, he just bounces it off the boards to himself.
Dude, that was...
and scores. Some of the 2 ridiculous individual efforts. So everything seems to be coming up Jets. I think they know there's areas to clean up. I do wonder if there's some, they're in first in the Western Conference. They've got games in hand in the Central. You saw them really bring the intensity in the Vancouver game. I wonder, if you play Chicago and, Arizona, who's lost now 12 in a row, like, there's some element of just putting it on cruise control at times when you have a lead. We'll get a look at, big divisional games this week against St. Louis and especially Dallas. So you'll see how they look there, more so Dallas. But I do wonder if there's some aspect of, taking your foot off the gas a little against these teams like Chicago and Arizona, and saving it for teams like Vancouver. I guess we'll take a look at that, hypothesis on Thursday in Dallas.
Fred Schneider in chat says, Huss says he was in Mexico. Really? He was working with the Jets on the power play. Mm-hmm. I'd love to take that sort of credit, Fred. I can't. But I will Barry Horowitz myself and take a little credit for calling that big game from Nikolai Ehlers on Friday. And I hope some of you jumped on our play of the day with the Ehlers goal at plus 200. He was phenomenal. Listen, just before we kind of get into Friday night's win and Sunday's win, I don't want to not recognize Jennifer Jones right near the start of the show. And Rennie's coming on later. Shout out to KNR, who waited to start their post-game show until the handshakes were done in that Scotties final between Manitoba or Jen Jones representing Manitoba and Rachel Homan of Ontario. The Scotties stole the show this weekend, Reem. I know you were paying attention on Saturday night as Homan and Jones went toe-to-toe in the 1-2 game for the Page playoff, which was won by Homan. when Jen was unable to get to the button on that final rock. And Homan herself was absolutely brilliant. She was the favorite going in. She's been the best skip and the best team all year long. Very deserving champions. But for Jen Jones on the other side of 50 with that young team from Manitoba to go head-to-head with and blow for blow with Homan and push her to the absolute brink was, I mean, just simply awesome to watch. I thought that maybe Jen had one more in her. I mean, one more miracle. We've seen her pull them off throughout her Hall of Fame career. But certainly, I think the right team won. But, man, what a way to go out for Jennifer Jones. Olympic gold medalist, all the Scotties wins. Historically, the greatest this country has ever produced. And it was a bit of a tearjerker at the end of the night for everybody in the building, people watching on TV, for Jen Jones' teammates, even for Team Ontario, as we saw the great Jennifer Jones finish up her career at the Scotties one last time.
Yeah, the curling was amazing. I found myself Saturday instead of, normally I got Hockey Night in Canada. I mean, Battle of Alberta, a nice game there, but I was glued in. They were going shot for shot all the way to extra ends. And, I mean, the shot Homan made to send it to extras, I mean, she had to be perfect. And she was, and it was a tough road for you to beat Jennifer Jones twice. So, I mean, well-deserved by Team Homan. And I think part of it here, you had the 4 Manitoba teams in action. Carey Anderson, playing as Team Canada, but you had Jones and Cameron, Team Anderson, and Kalen Laws throughout the week as well. So we were paying attention to the Scotties, and TSN.
And all made the playoffs.
Yeah.
I mean, there were 6 teams in the playoffs, 4 from our province, which says something about the incredible women on the ice here around Winnipeg.
So, shout out to TSN. They do a great job on the curling. It's one of the best, I think, sports to watch on TV. The broadcast very informative, and I was glued to it. I mean, I finished hockey last night, and I got the alert that game was still on. I watched the final end. Well, I streamed the audio from my phone to my car on the way home. So it was, it was pretty exciting stuff. You wanted to see Jen pull it out, but wasn't quite able to. I mean, down to the last shot in both games against Team Homan. So congratulations to them.
Yeah, it was, listen, and we'll get Jen on at some point to kind of look back and talk about it, but it was emotional. I mean, it was great to see her daughters with her that are a little bit older. I think they could appreciate the impact that their mothers had on the sport. Brett Lang, who's a friend, who was Jen's husband, was there being doing the role of supportive husband, and they will still play mixed. So we will see Jen at times, I'm sure, still competitively curling. And as far as what happens to that team, I think everything is sort of on the table. Of course, Mackenzie Zachariah stepped away from the team. They were a 5-some last year. So I'm not sure whether the other players will, maybe Mac will come back and they'll, be a foursome again, or whether they go their separate ways. But all those young women on the team, Jen Jones, have very bright futures. And a shout out to Carly Burgess, who was playing third. But what an incredible sweeper she is, sweeping the rocks for all 6 stones. And hey, just finishing up the curling conversation while we're talking about goats, Jennifer Jones, the greatest of all time on the ice. May I suggest that the legendary Vic Rauter is the best to ever do it. Don Whitman was an all-time legend, so maybe we won't say the best to ever do it, but Vic has still got it, and nobody right now in the world of curling does it better, and he was on his game this weekend with just incredible calls of 2 amazing matches. Heavyweight tilts, if you will, going blow for blow between Homan and Jones.
Yeah, make the final. Legend, always legendary stuff from Vic Rauter. So, yeah, I love the TSN curling broadcast. So, well done. Well done for them all week long out there in Calgary. Looks like a great event.
Brier's coming up this weekend. I know we'll kind of get into some picks and some odds on the lock shop later on this week, so make sure to check that out at noon over on the Edmonton Sports Talk channel with myself and Dustin Nielsen before we get going on WST every day. And you know what? This is a why not question of the day just before we get back to the Jets for not Autocorp at Waverly and McGillivray. And we will not know the answer, but this is almost, I've got my take on this, but the question of the day, and Remis, if you can, do a poll on this. WSTers, what do you think gets better, more TV eyeballs, better ratings? Is it the Scotties or the Brier? I am really interested in it. And maybe it was because we were watching last night and I'm thinking, what could the men possibly do to have this sort of drama, personality, all of that goes into the Scotties, and particularly that final. But I mean, I watched it all week long, and I find myself far more likely to jump on a weekday draw between these women's teams than I am with the men. Now, this might be very close. It might be significantly on either side. I really don't know. But I am interested in what you think has bigger TV ratings on TSN, the Scotties or the Brier. And then we will go back and we will find out. So I'm just looking. Love them both. I mean, it can be both. But, I mean, at some point, one of them is going to be more. Phyllis says probably the Brier. And Bones We Trust says the Scotties. I think I would vote Scotties. Like, I don't know. I just think that this is not one of the sports that, you know, the level of competition or anything. I mean, it's basically the exact same game. And I think I might argue that in a lot of cases, the women's game is a little more interesting. And certainly, I think, has stronger personalities and, you know, and iconic figures like a Jen Jones, not to diminish what the men have. Anyways, Scotties was amazing. Brier coming up. Maddie Dunstone representing our province. I think Reed Carruthers is going to be there as well. So we can kind of talk about that a little later on. We'll have to get Ted on. Ted can recap the incredible Scotties, Jennifer Jones' career and tee up what's happening at the Brier. But let's get to the Jets weekend. And we mentioned the Friday game, Reem. You know, the team got up early. This really was the Nikolai Ehlers show. Game time decision, and then scores two of the greatest goals. And, you know, we've talked, how is he connecting with this line and whatnot? Well, I don't know if we can really take much of how he's clicking with his line, because he literally did those two goals pretty much all on his own. And the second goal going the full 200 feet, including the pass to himself off the wall and then scoring in between three Blackhawks, will definitely be on the year-end highlight reel and one of the goals of the year.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we talked all about him all week. When's he going to score? He's in a slump. Who's he going to play with? And did it all himself. What was amazing to me was, you know, when a team that kind of slumped a little after, you know, you gave up a 2-0 lead to Chicago, that I follow Monahan Ehlers line in terms of shot attempts, extremely, extremely elite. 12 for 1 against. In terms of actual real shots on net, they didn't allow a shot on net, that line. They scored the 2 goals. So that line gets a star for me. So very well done. Hellebuck, solid, in terms of goals saved above expected, 2.09. He was
awesome. He was awesome on Friday night.
He's doing his thing. So, you know, maybe not the way you draw it up against Chicago, which has given the Jets a little trouble this year. Bedard winning overtime. They had that close one here. But, hey, you get the 2 points and move on. And big weekend for the Blackhawks. Chris Chelios, number retired. Nice ceremony there yesterday. But, yeah, it was a big one there for the Jets. And then, you know, had to quick turn around and come home to play Arizona.
Just as far as the Chicago game goes, listen, the team was up 2-0 and was comfortably ahead. Logan Stanley, when you're fighting for a spot in the lineup and you get the opportunity to play a couple games, you got to make the most of it. And I thought he was okay at times, but putting that puck right on the stick of, I believe it was Seth Jones, and then allowing Dickinson, who albeit was cheating a little bit, but you need to be heads up on that when you're playing defense in the National Hockey League, to quickly turn that around into a breakaway that went into the net, got Chicago back in the game. So that was unfortunate for Stan and Stan fans who were looking to see him establish himself in the lineup Needless to say, Nate Schmidt was in the next day. But Chicago brought it at the end. The Jets weren't able to clear the puck. Ehlers almost got his stick on it, got it out with the empty net. And the next thing you know, it's tied going to overtime. But it did, and this is going to be a similar refrain when we talk about tomorrow's game. The top line for the Jets was not particularly good in that Chicago game. They did not generate very much. They spent a lot of time in their own end. And I in particular, thought Kyle Connor had a really, really tough game. He was not effective. And then lo and behold, he goes out there and just ices the game in the first 25 seconds or so of overtime, Remis. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk about expected goals. Some also talk about actual goals, and Kyle Connor come overtime, and we'll be having the same conversation when we talk about last night's game, able to be a difference maker in 3-on-3 and get that valuable second point for Winnipeg.
Yeah, Friday night on 5-on-5, Huss, that line was on for 0 goals for and 1 against. Their share of the expected goals was 27.1%. And we talked about this all last week, how that line just hasn't been, that great in terms of owning the share of shots on net. However, those guys are all elite scorers. Connor and Shafley got great shots. Vilardi as well, who didn't score on an unbelievable deke, which was like a backhand toe drag on a breakaway. Didn't score on that. So, and they keep trying to put Shifley and Connor together, and I think historically those guys have been on the wrong side of the percentage of shots on net. So I wonder if they just keep trying to roll it going forward, because early on the Jets were playing very well to their system. They're out shooting opponents, playing strong defensively, and you just haven't really seen that the last couple of games. But they do keep winning because of the power play and great goaltending. So it's kind of the same story here with both games on the weekend, where the Jets aren't playing their best hockey like we've seen, but they keep winning. So, and they're scoring the power play, which they were not doing for a long time. So you're kind of conflicted here on how to feel. Do you want to say, great process, but oh man, they played well, and you just couldn't get that lucky break, couldn't score? Or you want what they've done, finishing on the power play, and maybe some parts at 5-on-5 that are not your favorite?
Well, here, listen, we wouldn't be having this conversation if the power play wasn't on the heater that it is on right now, because, and maybe this is all things just the water coming to a level, or kind of coming back to the mean, because I think with the talent the Jets had and have thrown out there on 5-on-4, it seemed almost impossible that they could have been as ineffective for as long of a period of time as they were. And I mean, there was an element of this has to turn around at some point, right? And it did. And I think maybe we'd say the same thing about the analytic numbers of that top line, although long-term, over a long period of time, I think the numbers tell you that the Jets often will give up more than they get. But again, what do you do with those chances? The Jets have Connor Hellebuck, and, when it comes to offensive chances, Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor and Gabriel Vilardi, pretty good at finishing. And Vilardi in particular, I thought, well, in both games, but last night, so dangerous. I mean, the hands on Gabe Vilardi with that goal that he scored on Sunday was something else. But, I mean, Nikolai Ehlers was the star of the show along with Connor Hellebuck on Friday. They got the 2 points, they got back home, and they got ready for Arizona. And tell me if you've heard this before, Remis, an early 2-goal lead that was chipped away by a team that in a lot of ways had no business doing so, and then back into overtime, and guess who? Kyle Connor being the difference maker in OT, scoring again early on the first shift before anyone else could even get on the ice.
Yeah, well, that goal on Friday's overtime winner just sucked. Like, as far as overtime winner goes, that was the most anticlimactic overtime winner. You want to see Kyle Connor, if he's going to score a winner, you want it to be a highlight reel goal with a dangle or a deke, or even a one
straight. We're complaining about overtime goals now?
I posted on our social media account Paul Edmonds' radio call, because we don't get to see him on TV, so I sync up the radio call with the TV call, and yeah, Friday's goal sucked. It was it bounced off Marcus Foligno's brother, and You think he meant to pass, but it's in the net and the Jets win. And, that's not exciting. You want to have a 3-on-1. There's drama. Josh Morrissey's teeing Kyle Connor up for a gorgeous one-timer. That is how you want an overtime winner to go, with a great celebration where you know that you intended to shoot the puck in the net, not where you try to pass. Pass instead of the puck, it bounces off a guy's leg. That's not exciting. So shout out to Kyle Connor for doing it right.
Problems. Look at these first world problems.
Well,
we're actually complaining about style points on overtime winners. Never did I think, this is, you're all privileged Jet fans, knowing that your team's battling for first place and you can complain.
Wasn't a nice winner
about the quality of OT goals. Well, listen, the goals of the year maybe were the Ehlers goals earlier on. So the bottom line was get one in the net, which they did. And then a nice one last night. We should quickly talk about one change that was made for Friday's game that stayed. And tomorrow, we kind of can get into this more with Rennie. But a swap of Cole Perfetti and Alex Iafallo in the game on Friday. And you sort of mentioned that line did not allow a shot against. I'm sure Rick Bowness liked that. I liked Iafallo's game in both games, to be perfectly honest with you. But I'll say this. I thought Cole Perfetti, handled the new line and the assignment actually quite well, playing with Vlad Nemetstikov and Morgan Barron in the first game, and then a little less ice time with Monahan out yesterday and Vlad moving up to line 2 and Kapari coming in. But it certainly did seem to be a move that helped the team, helped the second line. And as we've talked about Cole Perfetti, yes, he's in an extended slump right now, but I think he, as a young player, is learning how to play through it and didn't mind his game when he was out there as a fourth liner as opposed to where he's been on the top in the top 6 for most of the year.
Yeah, I like the lines Friday when you have Monahan at center. You can put Nemestikov, a guy who's, he's amazing. A guy goes from, he's your fourth line center. Now he's your second line center, and seems to have chemistry with a lot of players. And, Cole Perfetti is a good offensive player. And I think I like it. It gives you some more balance there with the 4 lines. And for a young player who's having a slump, and I heard Ken, on K&R say, maybe he doesn't look as quick as he does. And, he was injured last year. It is his first, full season in the NHL, and he's in a bit of a slump. So take a little pressure off. And I think he can still make plays down there on the fourth line, but I think it also gives the Jets a little balance. As Iafallo's a guy he's hit bingo. He's played on every line this year, and maybe he elevates a little. And those guys were good on Friday. The Monahan, Ehlers, Iafallo line, and Monahan, he was injured or he was illness. I wanted to speculate what happened, where he had his equipment on and then had to go home. So you hope that he's okay for tomorrow's game. Doesn't sound too serious. I don't know
whether we really need to speculate on all the things that could have happened with his equipment on that then left the game.
We don't need to get there.
But I know you were worrying. This is that ruined his chances for the 84-game regular season.
Well, that's why I was concerned. We talked about after he was traded how he was on pace if he played every game to play 84 games. So that's ruined now. They didn't do the Phil Kessel, maybe came on half equipment to get that game in, but you don't see that too often when guys play more than 82. So he can still get to 83 if he plays every game, but I don't think they're going to push it now. So unfortunate for the people like to look at the records, but fortunate for Monahan that he was able to get some rest there and try to recover from that illness.
Here, let's just grab a couple Bones clips quickly before Rennie comes in, because maybe let's just play. We can have some of these other ones, but Remo, if you can get number 6 ready, because this is a question from Ren to Bones on. Listen, it's hard to ignore the fact, even though that they've won, and he will tell you that not all games are Picasso's. Absolutely true. Despite these recent wins. These wins have not looked like Winnipeg Jet wins from earlier on in the season. Here's what Bones had to say to Rennie about kind of getting away from their structure.
Rick, your team has won vast majority of its games this year based on good systematic play, and it's also a team that has the capability for Helly to steal some games or for your skill to win games. Is there a concern that maybe as of late, you've relied a little more on the latter two than you have been on the system?
At times. We were fine in Chicago the other night. We didn't give up much. There's a little bit of that. So we've got it. We can tighten it up. When our structure breaks down, and we'd like the other teams are coming at us. But listen, we have the best winning percentage in the Western Conference. So the little tweaks that we need to stay on top of, we'll stay on top of.
Yeah,
we're doing pretty good.
I guess that, just to go a little bit deeper into that, you staying on top of it, like, is that something that you have to be concerned with? Is it something that you have to guard against? I'm not concerned about it. Do we have to stay on top of it? Yes, it's going to happen. You play 82 games. Every game is not a Picasso. It's not. And when you see little things creeping in, we address it. So we'll stay on top of it.
All right, so there is a Bones. I'm getting the feedback, Reem.
Okay, 1 sec.
There is our pal Rick Bowness doing his thing after the game on yesterday, and there's more. But we're going to talk about it with Shawn Reynolds. Before we do that, I mentioned this Thursday coming up, sold-out event at the Manitoba Sports Hall of Fame with our friends at Canadian Club for the Winnipeg Whiskey Festival. Really looking forward to seeing everyone that jumped on that. And I know Eric Bayer got a bunch of tickets. We went to just squeeze that other one in, and we'll look forward to seeing your gang there with the Canadian Club ambassadors to teach us all about whiskey, enjoy some of it, have a few eats, and hopefully watch the Jets take on the Dallas Stars in what should be a battle for first place. For First Canadian Club, proud sponsors of the Winnipeg Whiskey Festival. And when you're at your Manitoba liquor marts the next time, make sure to keep your eyes out for the Canadian Club display, including the original 100% rye and the 12-year. And remember, when you're enjoying Canada's favorite Canadian whiskey, always do it responsibly. Shout out to our friends at Manitoba Battery. The battery experts in Manitoba, about to open their second location out in the south end of the city on Dovercourt. Manitoba Battery has you covered with the best prices on batteries of all makes, models, sizes for all of your needs, beating the pants off the big box stores, and even better, we'll deliver it to you for free anywhere inside the city of Winnipeg with any purchase over $60. It's just that easy. We'll fill you in on the big grand opening of the new store in the coming days. But in the meantime, for all your battery needs, go to manitobabattery.com and hit them up at 204-783-8787. And you can visit them at 1026 Logan Avenue. And fellas, if you need to do a little maintenance on the lid, only one place to go. We're 8, in fact, and that, of course, is Modern Man Barber Shops. 8 convenient locations throughout the city, including the newest standalone locations on Pembina Highway, right by Bishop, and on Plessy Road on the east side of the city. Modern Man has you covered, fellas, with great haircuts, beard shaping, shaves, color services, and more. For your next cut, make an appointment and book your look via modernmanbarber.com. And give him a follow on Instagram over at Modern Man Barbershops. All right, let's bring in Shawn Reynolds from Sportsnet, fresh off a busy week with Kenny on Kenny and Rennie. Rennie, how are you, man? It's great to have you back on WST.
I'm doing great, Huss. It's great to be back.
So there's a bunch of ways we can look at this. People were freaking out when the team had lost 5 in a row. I will say that the wins coming out of that slump against Pittsburgh and San Jose were not the biggest confidence instillers, if you will, because the team wasn't scoring. And we were like, where's the offense? What's happened to the power play? Well, the team's scoring goals. The power play is carrying the team right now, and the wins are coming. But I know certainly from the question we just heard from you to Rick Bowness, this hasn't exactly looked like the Winnipeg Jets that we saw for the majority of, say, the first 50 games of the season. This is a business where it's about winning, and they've gotten wins. But where are you at on where the Jets are right now, coming out of this run, heading into a big week in the division, including a game for first place likely on Thursday against Dallas?
Well, you got to give the Jets credit where it's due. There's a lot of really good teams in the NHL that are struggling right now and having a tough time putting up points. And as the Jets have gone over this stretch of time, I couldn't agree with you more. They've won 6 of their last 7 games. Those first 2 wins weren't exactly confidence instilling. Their last 2 wins weren't exactly confidence instilling. So you're talking about 4 out of 6 wins that you're kind of like, nah. But they're wins, and they're finding a way to get those wins in when teams like Dallas are faltering, and Colorado is faltering, and Vegas still haven't figured themselves out, and Vancouver had lost 4 straight games. So give them credit. And to your point, they were at one time not scoring and couldn't get anything out of the power play, and they were winning on defense. Now the power play is winning them games when they're looking a little shaky in their structure. This is literally the team finding its way to win thing. And we all know the saying, good teams find a way to win. I thought Rick Bowness nailed it. You can't play the kind of style that we saw them playing in December throughout the entire season. And what I think is really good teams, for the most part, find ways to get rest during a year and then go into the playoffs playing at the very top of their game. So I think right now we can look at this, and I think Rick Bowness is right. You could look at the Jets and say they're getting points. Just be happy with that. Other than that, we're getting rest. We're not at the top of our game, but he doesn't think that they're that far off it, so it'll be easy for them to get to it. The one thing I would just say is for the Winnipeg Jets, they have a history in my mind of being a team that takes the foot off the gas pedal and then has a hard time finding it again. We saw that last year where they had a great start to the season, then fell off. The year before that, they had the greatest start in franchise history and then turned around and got lost and missed the playoffs. 2019, this was a team that was dominating the league going into Christmas time and then started falling apart in the second half of the year. It's common for the Jets to do this. So I think this is one of those things where people who just get mad at us for drilling down into wins and criticizing wins are going to have to continue to get mad, because what I need to see is someone who's covered the Jets for as many years as I've covered it. I'm thinking you need to see the same thing, Huss, is I need to see that the Jets prove come playoff time that they're the team that says, okay, we know how to play. We don't have to play that way all year. We can get our rest, but we know how to turn it on when it counts and when it's time. The Winnipeg Jets haven't been the team, and they don't really have it in their DNA as being the team who figures it out at the right time and gets going. So I guess the only thing I can say is what I'm seeing from the Jets lately doesn't instill confidence in me that they're a team that's going to succeed at the playoffs, but I don't think it means that they won't. I do think that, Rick Bowness seems to have this figured out. I think this team knows where its bread is buttered, how it needs to play to win. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they get there in the playoffs this year, but you can't turn and get upset with Jets fans out there who are feeling like maybe doom is around the corner, because these kind of games, the Jets, just barely getting by teams that are struggling is something. It's a game they've loved to play over the years, and usually that game doesn't play out well for them.
Okay, let me take the other side of this, because everything you said is true. And I mean, you look back at, the second half of seasons and some real lulls in January and February that have really cost the team and put them in a precarious situation into March and to April. And listen, we heard a lot of it during the 5-game winless streak, sandwiched around the All-Star break, and that was legitimate. This team's now won 6 of their last 7.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that didn't happen during those times that we've talked about before is winning and getting the 2 points when they really needed it. Like, it's March on Friday. So can we maybe say that this team has shown that, well, listen, you're not going to be at your best each and every night, that in this situation where they did sort of find themselves with their backs against the wall, they've done what they needed to do to win games, and that is the sign of, frankly, a good hockey team.
Well, but I don't think we haven't seen this before, Huss. I think the Winnipeg Jets for a long time has been how many times have the Jets pulled off these miraculous late comebacks? How many times have we seen them? The year of the Canadian division, they started doing it down the stretch before they went on that 7-game losing streak. Ottawa was lost that year, and every time they played Ottawa, they went into it, and it was this tough game and then they'd pull it out in overtime, and there'd be big smiles, and we'd be talking about how they found ways to win and all these kind of things. I guess what I'm saying is I think you're entirely right. And I don't think they're the same team as last year. And the reason I don't is because I see them sticking to their structure, whereas last year they completely abandoned their structure. Last year, that team got lost. The year before that, that team got lost. So that's why I say I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that I think they find it at the right time, because they really haven't strayed that far from it. But the Winnipeg Jets are a team in the past where the precursor to them not playing well is usually them playing exactly like they're playing right now. And Huss, we don't have to go that far to look back at it. We need to go and look at their stretch of hockey before the 5-game losing streak that they had, because they went out and they barely snuck one past Chicago, and they went in when Ottawa was still struggling, and they pulled one out, an overtime win against Ottawa. And in that stretch of games, they had some kind of crazy stretch of games where they played 10 games, and 7 of those games had been against the 6 bottom teams in the league. So the Jets were squeaking by and getting by. Comeback wins against, in the Kyle Connor game where he got hurt, a comeback win against an Anaheim Ducks team that is not very good. They lost one to the San Jose Sharks there. So the precursor typically to the Jets not playing well is this. It's them squeaking by not very good teams. And then when the schedule gets a little harder, they have trouble adjusting. So what I've never seen from the Winnipeg Jets team before is that they are this team that can do this and then flip the switch and be right on top of it. Now, last year, they turned things on a little bit last year going into the playoffs, and then they went in their first game against Vegas. They looked like they were going to run Vegas out of the building, and then things turned against them, and they weren't a very resilient team. So I guess for me, that's why I'm concerned with this. Yes, they're winning. Am I nitpicking? You're damn right. I am nitpicking like absolute crazy. But I think the Winnipeg Jets over the years, the very core of this team as it exists, have given us reason to nitpick about this. So that's why I do it. Listen, I'm not trying to ruin all you fans out there. The time they've gone 6-7. I'm not trying to ruin their climb up the standings. I'm not trying to be that guy who says, well, they're a good team, but they're a good team. If they play the way they can play, they're going to do very well this year in the playoffs. That's the way I see it. I just think that playing like this right now is not something to me that instills confidence in this team. I'm going to assume that it's them just catching some rest, catching a breather in the middle of the year. But in times past, the Jets have taken breathers and then they forgot to get back into the race.
I'll say this. The emergence of the power play has definitely been a good thing. And, I don't know, there's many a times where I've been listening to you and Ken afterwards. You could say, well, they played a really great game. They were awesome at 5-on-5, and special teams cost them that game. And now I was grabbing a drink in between periods, and there were some guys that I was talking to just in line. And we kind of said, well, we were talking about the Chicago game a little bit and what we've seen so far. And I said, oh, good thing they've got the best power play in the league all of a sudden. And it is. And again, there's different ways of winning games. And this is a different way that the team's been winning. And what you hope is that come playoff time, the team can lean on the successes of the 5-on-5 play, knowing they can't get the power play, and you get that all going together at the most important time of the year. Digging down a little deeper, though, there's been a lot of talk about the Jets' top line, and it's kind of a hilarious conversation because, listen, I was watching the game on Friday night, and I said to my pals that I was watching the game with, Kyle Connor has been terrible tonight. I just thought that he had a really, really rough game. Nothing was happening for him. The passes were being missed, and then he goes out and scores the winner. Then does the exact same thing last night, although I don't think he struggled on Sunday the way that he individually did on Friday night. And then, you look at all these numbers of expected goals and how the lines, has not been getting their share of time in the offensive zone. And then I pull up his game score and I realize he's got 2 goals, 1 goal, 4 goals in the last 3 games, 10 points in his last 5 games. And I'm like, should people be worried about this line, or should people be going this line is on fire?
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think to the degree when the conversation that we just had about where the Jets are and maybe a reason for concern, I'm not the biggest analytics guy in the world, but I think the analytics community is similarly seeing things that I'm seeing, just arriving there from different conclusions. But what they're seeing as a line is what they're doing is unsustainable. But in the meantime, they just keep winning and winning and winning. And I guess the argument I would have is if you take a look at really good players throughout the history of the game, I'm sure there were stretches of hockey at times when maybe Wayne Gretzky's line, if you had the analytics back in those days, wouldn't look that good. And yet somehow he's always ending up on top, right? And maybe Mario Lemieux would have gone through the same thing. And Steve Yzerman, all the greats that a lot of us grew up watching. If the analytics were around in those days, there'd probably have been a lot of times during really important seasons that we look back on and think, man, were they dominant that year, that they went through stretches of a hockey where they weren't that dominant, right? Well, I think it's got to be very, very hard for a coach to take a look at the analytics. And I think the analytics community is bang on this one. The Winnipeg Jets top line has been getting outperformed by other lines everywhere except on the scoreboard where it matters most. And so I think it's got to be really hard for a coach to say, well, you know, their goals per 60 isn't where I'd like it to be. Now, I know they won us the last 3 games, but I'd like that analytic number to bump up a little bit. So we're going to break up that line, right? You just can't do that as a coach. A lot of what you do with coaching and athletics in general is it's intuitive. It's a feel. And right now, the feel that line has is they're not going to be the prettiest line out there, and they're going to get socked in their zone, and things aren't going to be that great. But they're going to find a way to win the game. And sometimes you have to turn to your best players and say, if you're finding a way to win the game, I'm not going to get in front of that. I think that's happening with the Winnipeg Jets top line right now. Now, if the worm turns in this and suddenly they have a hard time putting the puck back in the net again, if they keep playing like they're playing right now, then they're going to start losing the battle with the opposition. They're going to start getting outscored, and it's going to be a problem. That's something you address at that time. So this is another one of these things. This is another way of saying right now the success and the goals of that line and them winning is hiding some warts right now. And I think it's the same thing that I was saying earlier on. The Winnipeg Jets have won 6 of 7. Those wins right now, they may be winning, but they're hiding warts right now. But it's really hard, I think, if you're a coach to go and tell your players, listen, we're winning hockey games, but I'm going to tear it down and build it back up again because I don't like how we're winning hockey games, or I don't like how you are outscoring your opposition. I just don't think you can do that. You have to ride whatever the wave is and then gather when things start, when the wave runs out, and then find a new way to do it at that time.
Yeah, and I mean, Bones defended. Like, I did think that shift that they just skated around in their own end and it was in the second period, so you had the opposite changes, and Arizona was able to change guys. But that ended up eventually in the back of the net. I believe it was Maselli that scored that goal.
Yes.
And I think you can really look to that period of time in the hockey game that sort of turned it in the favor of the Arizona Coyotes, and they went forward. And I think, you know, to your point about the challenges from a coaching staff perspective of, you know, trying to get more and change a line that is statistically, like, maybe not expected goals, but real actual goals, is performing at a big level. I mean, those video conversations and the video work is probably where it comes in the most, in kind of going shift by shift. And, you know, you're realizing, geez, there's not a lot happening. We didn't have the puck. We were chasing around. But then having that confidence in the ability to make the most of those chances. And, I mean, there's no doubt that they want to get more out of that line. And when I say get more out of it, I'm not meaning scoring, because that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
But just have the puck a little bit more and not be spending as much time defending, because I think we all know, especially Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor in particular, those guys are the best when they're in the other team zone, when they have the puck, and would not be referred to as defensive stalwarts. Although I will say, I think early on, at least in the first half of the season, into about that time where things started getting a little shaky around the All-Star break, they certainly had improved their work in that department. But there's been a lot of things that have gotten away on it. Going into this period this weekend, the big talk was on Nikolai Ehlers and Cole Perfetti. And I had said that, listen, I've got a lot of time for talking about Ehlers on that top line. But Ehlers is going to need to show more to put himself in the position, because he had not been playing very well over the course of the couple weeks. We certainly weren't saying that on Friday night. I mean, Ehlers with I said it on the show, listen, this could be a perfect opportunity for a real get-right game for those players. It went very differently for the two. Ehlers stole the show on the top line, and on a line that once Alex Iafallo went in Cole Perfetti's place, did not allow a shot on goal against. And meanwhile, Perfetti ended up on the fourth line. I thought actually played quite well, played less yesterday with Carey in the lineup. But thoughts on Ehlers and Perfetti's weekends, starting off with Ehlers sort of breaking out on Friday and where Cole is at right now with that move to the fourth line.
Yeah, it's tough to see where things are going with Ehlers just because, like you'd said, he had that breakout game, and it looked like we were finally starting to see, okay, him and Monahan are starting to understand how to play with each other. And now, because Monahan's success has been largely on the power play, and Ehlers' success on that line that day was basically two individual efforts. So you can't really say now the second line is banging. But I did see things happen in that game where I started to see two players who are gaining some confidence and feeling comfortable, Monahan more so feeling comfortable on the team and kind of figuring it out his way. I was interested in seeing that, and Iafallo adds that defensive element there that maybe you can get, it's like almost a perfect balance thing. Iafallo can score, but he gets you really great defense. Right in the middle of it, Sean Monahan is kind of a perfect hybrid of both. He's able to score, but he's able to defend. And then on the other hand, you've got some super high-end offensive talent in Nick Ehlers, and maybe it all comes together and it works. So it was unfortunate last game Sean Monahan couldn't play because I think that would have really kind of colored in for us where that line is heading. And if there's room for them to grow, I think there's room for them to grow. The Perfetti thing is tricky because I agree with you, Huss. He didn't look bad on that fourth line the other night. Last night, he didn't have, as much of a game as I thought he would. But it's one of those things where the fourth line, it all depends on what you want it to look like and what you want it to be. And because you've got Morgan Barron as a staple on that line, it kind of locks in what you want that line to be. Now, because Nemesnikov can be there, Nemesnikov's that guy who can play both offensive and defensive. So maybe he's the saving grace for Cole Perfetti on that line. And maybe because he left that line and Rasmus Kupari takes over, who's just very much a straight line player who hasn't shown much in the way of offensive capability. That's why Perfetti doesn't show as well. The thing I think is tricky with Perfetti is if Nemesnikov's there, there's probably a place for him to be there and add that little bit of offensive. Maybe you start getting some goals from the fourth line because you've got this first round pick who's super, super hockey IQ, may find a way to pick apart fourth lines and add some value offensively there that you wouldn't expect. But sometimes you're just going to want a fourth line to go out and just run the other team around. That doesn't work well for Cole Perfetti. So if Cole Perfetti finds that the second line clicks and Iafallo stays there, he's not going to the third line because he doesn't fit that line's identity, and the third line operating at highest capacity, you don't want to break that up. So if the only place for you is the fourth line, now if you're Cole Perfetti, you are subject to what Rick Bowness wants in the opposition that they're playing. If you need a heavy line that can skate hard and forecheck, he probably doesn't make it into the lineup that game. So the one thing I see about Cole Perfetti is we may be getting to a spot where you see him interchanged and sometimes spending some time in the press box because what they want from the fourth line, he doesn't necessarily fit.
Ren, one of the other moves on the weekend was on the blue line, and Logan Stanley had gotten in for a couple of games. He was sort of front and center on the goal that got Chicago back into the game, and then Nate Schmidt was put back into the lineup. And I don't know about you, I thought Schmidt had a great game yesterday. I thought he was noticeable. I thought he was impactful. I thought he was playing with some confidence and adding some oomph, a little bit of offense to that pairing. Now that we've seen Stanley pop in again for a couple games and then out, how do you see this going forward for the remainder of the season? Does he get back into some games, or is this just in case of emergency break glass depth player that will play if guys ahead of him are unable to suit up?
I think he gets back in, but I think you nailed it there with Schmidt, because Schmidt never left the lineup because he gave them a reason to leave. Logan Stanley got in because of something that had nothing to do with Nate Schmidt, but he finds himself as the number 6 defenseman. Because Dylan gets suspended, they need someone to come into the lineup, and Logan Stanley comes in and he looks good. So what happened in that time is Logan Stanley earned himself a shot, and Nate Schmidt, the predicament he finds himself in is he's the 6th guy, and all of a sudden, if a guy pops in the lineup and gives coaches reason to say, I'd like another look at that guy. Well, Nate Schmidt doesn't have to do anything wrong. He just finds himself out of the lineup. That's his lot in life where he stands right now. But it works both ways. For Logan Stanley, his lot in life is because he's a 7th guy. If he can get in and show reason to keep him in, he's going to get some games. He's going to have a guy pulled out of the lineup to make space for him because the coaches want to see more from him. But the problem with Logan Stanley over his career hasn't been that he hasn't at times shown that he's big and bad and strong and can defend and do all those things and really make an impact. His problem is exactly what we saw and what you explained in that game against Chicago, in that he turns around and makes a I don't want to say a boneheaded mistake, but he makes a mistake, gives the puck away, and then allows his man past him to get in for the breakaway, and the game turns in that moment. And Nate Schmidt isn't making mistakes that turn games against the Winnipeg Jets, and Logan Stanley came in and he did. It's razor thin, the margin for error where these guys sit as the 6th and 7th defenseman, and Logan Stanley showed again in that game why he's not able to stick full-time, because he makes the kind of mistakes that turn a game in the favor of the opposition. So what I see happening here is maybe he's going to get in time, here and again. But right now, if I'm taking a look at the work that both of them have, and quite clearly the sample size is much smaller with Logan Stanley, but that small sample size checks in with what we've seen from him in years past. If I'm a coach, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, in the end, Schmidt is the safer option. So when it becomes important, Schmidt is going to be the guy who's gone with. Yes, I think Logan Stanley will get in here and again, but unless he gets in and starts doing some really amazing things, I think Schmidt has shown, even though he's not where they've wanted him to be, he's still ahead of where Logan Stanley is, and the safer option for a team that will need that down the stretch.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Ed from Canada saying Stanley was being showcased for possible trade. I guess we'll see. I'm sort of the opinion that the Jets, would feel comfortable and would like to have Stanley as a 7th, 8th defenseman in the playoffs. And if you have to go down that depth chart, he'd be a guy that they know that they can play. But just on our way out on that topic, do you think that the Jets will add a blue liner? Obviously, Viljanen is in the mix, and you could potentially have him. And I would argue that, listen, I'd go with the 6 the Jets have right now. I think the Sandberg-Schmidt pairing has proven all year long that they are very competent to play that role, and the numbers will tell you the same thing. If one of those guys were out, I personally, and I think a lot of people would like to see Villy, get an opportunity to get back in there, probably ahead of Logan Stanley. But there's the possibility that I think we have to realize this is could be somewhat of a lost season for Heinola, considering missing the first year and not necessarily going right in and being a player in the playoffs. So as it pertains to the deadline on the blue line, you think that they'll make an ad, and will it be a depth guy that wouldn't even be in the top 6, but just plays maybe ahead of Stanley if somebody gets hurt?
I think they do. I'll just touch on Viljanen quickly, because I think, Viljanen had earned a spot in the lineup. This is a timing issue that I think is just terrible for him, because he gets injured, and that injury carries him so deeply that you're getting close to the trade deadline where you have to make a decision. If you're a team that thinks you've got a chance at winning the Stanley Cup, you need to take care of all your holes by that point in line. And the problem with Viljanen at this stage is, yes, he made the team out of camp and he had earned a spot, but then he fell out and he hasn't been in the lineup. And even though he did make the Jets opening day roster, they still don't know what he looks like for the duration of an NHL season. They still haven't seen from him what he looks like with a 20-game audition with the Winnipeg Jets. So because of that, he remains a question mark. Even if he came back and hopped into the lineup tomorrow and started showing well, there's only a certain amount of games before the trade deadline that he can show. And then, well, maybe after the trade deadline happens, we start to see, and we've seen this all the time, players come into the league and they play on adrenaline for a little while. And then when they settle into the routine, you see that there's some things they need to work on. The Jets can't make that mistake with Viljanen. They need to be assured that they've got things taken care of. So because we're having this conversation about Nate Schmidt and Logan Stanley, and that it's, not ideal, they may feel there's a little bit of ability to get better there. If they can go out and find a really solid defenseman, probably one with size, probably one that brings some stability to the lineup, and one that, is that kind of guy who just does not let players get to the front of the net, I think there's a real value in that. And then you kind of shift guys downwards in the lineup and they fit in, and then they look, even the guys you have in your lineup look even better because they're playing less difficult minutes down the stretch, which really plays out with defense over the course of the playoffs. You can see that happen. So Viljanen, timing is absolutely terrible. He go buy a rabbit's foot Villy, because the luck hasn't been there for you to get your showcase there. But yeah, I do see the addition of a defenseman, because I think the Jets want to make sure that they're ironclad going into the playoffs. And whether as good as they've played, I think adding that extra guy gives you that much more assurance on the back end.
Rennie, great chat as always. I always love KNR after the games, but I think tomorrow will be a really interesting one with the commissioner in town. Obviously, there's lots of Jets conversations on the ice and off the ice that we're having right now, and it should be a very interesting one when you and Kenny fire it up after tomorrow's game against the St. Louis Blues. Thanks again for doing this. As always, great to have you on the program, and I'll look forward to hearing from you and Kenny tomorrow.
No problem. Say hi to my main man Hammy for me, please.
Will do. He's coming up next, Jeff Hamilton from the Winnipeg Free Press. And, we'll get into some more Jets talk on and off the ice with Hammer, as well as some CFL talk. A big story that we're still sort of waiting for more information on out of Toronto. But, of course, tomorrow is a big day here in Winnipeg. There is that fan forum with Commissioner Gary Bettman. He'll also be working and I believe speaking to members of the business community right now. We talked about it last week extensively. If you missed Norva Riddell on the program last Wednesday, check out that program for a little bit more details. But right now, as the Jets work tirelessly to get that season ticket base up back to where they need, it is the promotion going into the playoffs, where if you put a deposit down on a package for next season, you'll get priority playoff tickets. And we know how amazing the playoffs are here in Winnipeg. So, we'll talk about this more as we go forward. But go to winnipegjets.com/deposits for all information. You can find the seating map. Take a look at season tickets starting at $40 for a get-in price for next season. And most importantly, get to be on board when the team certainly needs you, and at the same time, count yourself in for some whiteouts ahead of the general public come playoff time. Again, that's winnipegjets.com/deposit. Got to thank our friends at Wallace & Wallace for their great support of Winnipeg Sports Talk. Spring is just around the corner, and we're going to be seeing those fences and trucks all over the city, as Wallace & Wallace is the fencing and overhead door specialist in Winnipeg, doing it since 1946. They're also the leaders in overhead garage doors. And listen, I think this next week is going to be a perfect example of it, where it goes from +6 to -14, literally in just a few hours. Winter is the time that puts much more stress on your garage door, and the right time to prevent downtime is now. You can give Wallace & Wallace a call to book your maintenance and inspection service call today. For residential and commercial overhead door sales and service and fencing, there's only one name or two you need to know. That is Wallace & Wallace. And hey, shout out to our friends at F Apparel. We are getting into, believe it or not, the wedding season planning is in full effect right now. Guys, if you're looking ahead to spring and summer and realize that it's about time you up your menswear game, There's only one place you need to go, and that is F Apparel over at 190 Smith Street. Custom suits beginning at $400, along with chinos, golf pants, custom shirts, both tucked and untucked styles, and an incredible selection of menswear accessories. And if you are getting married or in a wedding party, make sure to talk to the guys at F about a 15% discount when the fellas get their suits for the big day at F Apparel. Again, 190 Smith Street downtown. Find out more online or make an appointment at F, that's EPH apparel.com. All right, let's get the hammer in here and keep the show on the road. Again, Mike Distefano, a.k.a. Al's brother from Overdrive, coming on a little later on. We're going to talk about that crazy sale of the box of hockey cards, a case of hockey cards for almost 5 million Canadian on the weekend. But it's hammer time on WST. It's not Monday without it. How are you? How was the weekend?
Haas, the weekend was good. I purchased a Fire Stick, a Fire TV stick.
Nice.
For the first time. Yeah.
Is it working? Have you got it all going? And
oh yeah, it's all going. I've taken that subsequent next step and canceled a majority of my subscriptions to all the things that I individually signed up for. So now that I have this stick, the world's my oyster, man.
How does these work, and are they legal?
Sorry, man, I got someone on the other line. I got to quickly run here, okay, just for a second. Hey, what are you doing here, man? What are you doing here? You're trying to ruin my weekend?
Although you offered it up, I'm very interesting. I've heard from other members of the WST team about the Fire Stick before, but I haven't had any interaction with it.
So yeah, I don't know if it's above board, Huss. I don't know if it's above board, because when I had to configure it, when I put the stick in the back of my TV and had to do these things, I was doing things that were so clearly put in place to bypass certain things on your TV. So I don't think so. I don't know how much of my very little per month that I'm paying goes to these different, I'm not even going to name the channels because I'm not going to do that, but I don't know how much goes back to. And that right now, that's not my problem. I'm in the solution mode right now. And this was a solution to a lot of things that I was paying for on a monthly basis is no longer coming off my my bottom line, if you will. So yeah, terrific weekend, man. Here we are.
Winnipeggers love the deal. There is no doubt about that. Listen, I want to get to a couple of Jets topics with you, and we'll get to the off ice in a second. But like we were just chopping it up with Rennie. I mean, it's been the team had lost 5 games in a row. It was like, okay, there's a lot of people thinking doom and gloom. The team hasn't looked great over the course of the last couple of weeks, and yet they've won 6 of 7 games. The underlying numbers for the top line look ugly. Kyle Connor's got 10 points in his last 10 games. Mark Scheifele's had a couple 4-point games. Josh Morrissey's got 9 assists. By the way, was the #1 star in Jets This Week with Connor Rabchak. Check that out on the WST feed and channel if you haven't already.
There you go.
But where are you at on has the team bounced out of that slump? Are they still sort of in it, but yet finding a way to win games? I mean, there's a lot of hot and cold depending on who you talk to right now about the club. But the bottom line is they've got a game against St. Louis and then a game on Thursday against the Dallas Stars, which is likely going to be for first place, not to mention the games they have in hand on Colorado and Dallas.
Yeah, I think it's, I heard Shawn's hit in the last segment, and I don't want to say he even said it. It's not like he's trying to be the doom and gloom guy and whatnot by acknowledging the fact that the Winnipeg Jets, on a 3-game win streak right now, just haven't been playing that style of hockey that we saw them play for a majority of the season, and I mean that's been that dominating 5-on-5 game. I mean but it's funny to me because when you're complaining, when the 5-on-5 game was the tops, among tops in the NHL or one of the tops in the NHL, it was the power play that sucked. It was the power play that wasn't getting the job done. Now, and I've seen this sentiment on social media. I've seen this sentiment amongst my friends and family members who watch the Jets. Now when the Jets go out to a power play, the expectation is that they're going to score. And that's really what we've seen is a boon in special teams, particularly on that power play unit. And that's in some cases won them games, right? And so, I don't know if I'd look at this team and be worried about them. I just think it's one of those, everyone's getting better right now. Everyone's getting more desperate right now. So the fact that the Jets are carving out victories at a time where, the intensity is expected and has ramped up is a positive thing. And now I think what's less convincing about some of the victories is who they're up against. And so, if beating Chicago is different than beating Dallas. And that's kind of the beauty of this league, right? I mean, you win one game, you're the best team in the world. You lose a game, you're the worst team in the world. Well, if you beat a team like Dallas coming up here, then you answer some of those questions that maybe some fans have, some media have. And that concern, if you will, and I'll piggyback off what Shawn said last segment, was it's just because we've seen enough in the past to, in some ways, be concerned about the future. And whether that applies this year, we don't know because we haven't gotten there yet. But I do think the Jets are obviously a good team. They're getting good goaltending. I still find it funny when Connor Hellebuyck doesn't have a good night. It's just like, those people go right back to kind of throwing him under the bus. But I do think this team
insane. He's like a lock for the Vezina Trophy.
Well,
right
exactly.
now.
And I mean, guys aren't, and that's the case for everybody, whether you're in net or whether you're out, like you're not going to have your best game every night. And so, but the Jets have, and I've said this in the past, and it's something they weren't able to do. Like the Jets have earned where they are right now, regardless of, how streaky they will be in some areas, how dominant they've been. They had obviously that losing streak not too long ago. That had people down, but the Jets have earned their position. They've earned to be in this spot this late into the year to compete for the tops of the Central Division, to compete for the top of the Western Conference, to compete for that President's Trophy. And so, it's hard to kind of look at their game and see them as that same dominating team just because maybe other teams are getting better. Teams are getting more desperate as we get closer to playoffs here, jockeying for position in the standings. But I do think that the Jets need to find a little bit more consistency here. I think if you're not just fans of this team, if you're players on this team, you want to be going into the playoffs playing consistently, not having question marks in your game. And while there are not a lot of questions in the Jets game per se compared to previous years, you want less questions because that this team's going to be a contender if they're going to battle with the New Yorks, with the the Dallas Stars. They're going to battle with the top teams in the NHL. They need to have fewer question marks. And so I'm not pushing the panic button. I don't think anyone should really be pushing the panic button. But this is an interesting time of year. I mean, this is the part where the Jets need to find a new level. So they're getting the victories. I think what we need to see now is more of that commitment back to the defensive side, 5-on-5. And at the same time, if they can do it, hold on to this momentum that they've had on special teams. Because, wowee, man, I mean, if we've seen the Jets at their best 5-on-5, and now we're seeing them arguably easily, actually, the best that they've been on the power play. If they can somehow find a way to marry those two things, this could be a very dangerous team and an exciting one come the spring.
Yeah, that's certainly what Rick Bowness and his coaching staff will look to have entirely locked in for game 83 of the regular season. It is funny looking at the standings right now. I mean, obviously if you just go to overall standings, the Jets are in 5th or 6th. But they've got games in hand on everybody, and you look at points percentage, and they're just a smidge below the Florida Panthers, who are at a 690 clip. And
everyone up top is kind of going through it right now, right? All the like Vancouver's going through it right now. I mean, there's teams that are, you get the target on your back, you're going to go through it. In the West, for sure. In the East, they're a little.
Florida and the Rangers are kicking ass right now. And the Rangers just lost one. They'd won 9 in a row before that. They lost to Columbus.
They didn't hit 10? I think
they lost they lost to Columbus yesterday. That was the
so they had their 10th win though. I think they got their 10th win on the previous game. I think they nailed, which might have been a franchise record or might have tied one, but I know they hit 10.
Yeah, and the Florida's 8-2, and Florida, like I watched that Florida Carolina game last week, and listen, if we want to talk about teams that are ready for the playoffs, and guess what, you don't need to be ready for the playoffs in the last week in February. You need to get there and to be at that spot. But Carolina and Florida played a 1-0 game that had about 80 shots on goal, brilliant goaltending, back and forth. It was just an unbelievable hockey game. And I remember watching that game going, well, this is a step up or two from what we've seen from the Jets, mostly in this last little run. I mean, I certainly loved the game they had last Saturday against the Vancouver Canucks. They unfortunately followed that up with a dud. But after that Calgary game, as much as you could probably look at the 60-minute body of work and say there's a lot of things you'd like to get better, you beat Minnesota, you beat Chicago, you beat Arizona, you get the job done, and you're in this position right now. But we are in a position where we're looking ahead to the trade deadline. We're looking ahead to the stretch to the playoffs and trying to see where this team is at right now. And I think we can all agree, and Rick Bowness said it himself, that, the 5-on-5 play has not quite been at the level that this team's established. But so much talk about the top line, and Kyle Connor seemed to be in a pretty extended slump, was getting some heat. The expected goals, as we've talked about, have not been very good. They have been, on the wrong end of the ledger on most nights. I thought Connor had a really rough night in Chicago on Friday, and yet there he is popping the overtime winner in back-to-back games. And, oh, look at this. After that long slump, he's got 10 points in the last 5 games. Like, where are you at on the production, the play, and what the Jets have in that top line, especially after Nikolai Ehlers made a pretty big statement on Friday night that he's back and capable of more that he'd been putting out at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, that line has been the not question mark in the sense that you don't have options, but it's been the question all season long, especially when you had Kyle Connor leave and you had Nikolai Ehlers join that group with Vilardi and Mark Scheifele, and they were arguably the best line in the league. So there's always going to be that memory in the back of your, fans' heads. But Kyle Connor, he's an interesting guy, man. I mean, he's, goals are king in the NHL, and you'll hear GMs talk about it. You'll hear people around the league talk about it. You pay for goals. You don't ever hear, guys get paid for playing defense for sure. I mean, there's guys that made a career off playing, forwards that are playing on the defensive side of the game. They're just not making the money that Kyle Connor's making. And so it's hard to kind of, I don't know where I stand with that, to be honest with you. Like, you obviously want to see a commitment to the defense, a better commitment to the defensive side of the game. That whole idea, like when we were watching the Jets just absolutely dominate the league through the first half, everybody looked exactly like each other. Each line, obviously bring different things to the table, but structurally looked exactly the same. You're not seeing that as much anymore. I think you're seeing costly errors happen. You saw them with Nikolai Ehlers, and we talked about this last week, where some of that punishment, whether it's a Cole Perfetti or Nikolai Ehlers versus a Kyle Connor or a Mark Scheifele or whatever, that sometimes that discipline off errors is not doled out the same. But that being said, you can be upset if you're Rick Bowness. You can be upset with Kyle Connor's defensive side of his game, and you can have these conversations with him. But if he's scoring goals that are quite literally winning you games, there is a bit of that give and take, I think, from the coach and player relationship. I just think when you look at that line, depending on how the Jets want to attack the playoffs, you want to have better, when you start playing against the more complete teams, as you start advancing more and more in the playoffs, it's not that one dominating line on the opponent that you necessarily want to put on with the Adam Lowry line to shut down. And that doesn't even take into consideration when you're on the road and you don't get last change. So you're as Kyle Connor, as a guy on the top line, you're going to have to play against the other team's top line, and you need to be responsible in those situations. So certainly there's something to be said about the improvement. You mentioned the underlying numbers on the defensive side of the game with Kyle Connor. But again, if he's scoring goals, I imagine it's a bit lesser of an issue. It's still an issue, but it's lesser of an issue. But that top line in general, we'll see what happens here. I saw, what was it? Was it Mark or Nikolai Ehlers gave the jacket to Mark Scheifele in the locker room afterwards? Maybe who knows? All I know is that the Jets have options for that top line. But they definitely need to get production out of that top line.
Well, they need production out of the second line too, and that's absolutely what was a concern when Ehlers and Perfetti were in that extended slump. And certainly Sean Monahan has brought a lot. It was unfortunate not to see them be able to go right back to that line last night after the performance they had, because while the goals, Nikolai Ehlers owned the highlight reel and, was the man with those two incredible snipes. They didn't allow a shot on net in that game. And, listen, if Ehlers can have the puck and they can be being offensive and they can be having far more than their fair share of time with the puck in offensive zone, this team needs to have both of those lines being effective. And I still do think that when it comes down to it, I think that the coaching staff, and I'll be honest, I sort of feel this as well, I think that second line is a lot more dangerous with Nikolai Ehlers sort of being that offensive catalyst than, for instance, I think he adds a lot more and is able to spark things more himself than a Kyle Connor is, who, certainly has all the attributes and he's a finisher and he does that. I'm not sure he does that as much himself, and I think that's sort of why they're going to give this more time with Monahan. What did you think of Iafallo moving to that line, though, and Perfetti moving to the fourth?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago with where Perfetti's game was at, and that it was kind of trending towards that way, and that it wasn't going to be a third, like you weren't going to put him on a third line with Adam Lowry's line, because while he might add maybe a bit more scoring touch to that line, I don't think he gives you what you want out of that line, those grinding minutes, right? That ability to play 200 feet, in particular in your own defensive end, creating offense out of your defense.
And with all the toughest matchups every night.
Exactly. And exactly. And so I think, it made sense to put him on the fourth line. Honestly, Huss, I think we're getting to a situation here that if the Winnipeg Jets, view themselves as contenders, if they're going to be a contending team, I think you have to look at Cole Perfetti maybe not being on your second line. Maybe that, maybe having, and I don't say that necessarily there's someone in-house. Like if Cole Perfetti is on your second line, you can make that work. Great. We saw a very small sample size earlier in the season where Cole Perfetti had, 10 points in like 8 games. If you look at his points now, I don't know how many he's added since I did this thing, but he had like 50, 53, 54 points at a certain point. Many games, but like 16 of his points were in between, the beginning of like the end of August and the end of October and the end of November. It was like, he was scoring, and we haven't really seen that from him. And I don't know if it's a confidence thing. I don't know if we're looking at a player here that just because of his injury past hasn't put forth that full 82 game season. And so maybe we're seeing things kind of fall off for him right now. Maybe some of the endurance isn't there, and maybe that's Rick Bowness's ability to kind of put him on the fourth line, which I know isn't a great demotion, isn't a great situation for him. Cole Perfetti talked about wanting to be relied on this season, wanting to grow into that role. The conversation heading into training camp was, could he possibly be the guy that could center that second line? Well, that conversation doesn't even exist anymore. So I think it is an opportunity for kind of get his confidence back, get his game back. I don't think it's a great situation for him on that fourth line, because he's not playing with I don't want to say caliber, but I'll say it is the caliber I'm talking about. And that's not to take away from, those, the David Gustafsons of the world and whatnot, but this is a guy who's played top six, takes a certain skill set, thinking, kind of being able to read off each other that isn't quite there on, in the bottom lines, or at least that's not the role you're being asked to. So, it will be an interesting situation with Cole Perfetti. I think the Jets still are actively looking to add, at this deadline, whether that be a top six forward, if they can do that. Or bringing in obviously D-men, but Cole Perfetti, it's really up to him at this point. I mean, this is the life of the NHL. You need to earn your ice time. You need to prove to your coach that you're capable of playing in all situations. And right now, maybe some of that confidence is not there. I'm not saying it won't come back. I'm not saying that Cole Perfetti won't be viewed as a key piece. I mean, of course, he'll be viewed as a key piece in the playoffs. They need everybody to be a key piece for a big run. But I do think that maybe we're not seeing the maturity of Cole Perfetti, and I don't mean that as a person. The guy's probably more mature than most of the players in that roster, but the maturity in his game to be relied on for such an important top six role.
Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press is with us. Hammer, let's get to everything happening off the ice. And it'll be an interesting day tomorrow. The commissioner's coming to town. And again, the commissioner goes to every team over the course of the year. But I don't think the timing is coincidental of Commissioner Bettman coming here. And listen, he might have more fans in Winnipeg than he does in a lot of other markets because, this team wasn't coming back to Winnipeg if he wasn't behind it and made that happen. But we're in a very different place than 2011. And I have a feeling we're going to hear, it's just sort of some reinforcement of what he said in 2011, that this team is good to go as long as this team is the 13,000 season tickets. Just sort of your thoughts on the challenges that the team is going through right now, what we might get out of tomorrow, and, as well, what we learned from, what Mark Chipman had to say with Chris Johnson on, seemingly some admission of some missteps along the way, and hopefully creating a new path forward that is good for the team and this community.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting, Huss. I know it's been talked about quite a bit. It's been a big thing over the weekend. This feels like a redo to me for these guys. I think last spring when they brought out that Forever Winnipeg campaign, a lot of people viewed it as a veiled threat. People viewed it as and that's not going to work in this market. I think the Jets were hoping, because these things, they don't just come up, they don't come to be in 2 weeks. Like these marketing plans take months to figure out, to execute. And I think the Jets were assuming, given their first half of the season, that they'd be in a much better position last spring to have that campaign. But of course, as we saw, Winnipeg had a great first half, almost fell off a cliff in the second half of the season, backed their way into the playoffs. I don't think that message really was heard by a lot of the fan base. A lot of people who were frustrated with a team that had done so well and then seemed to go back to where they were the previous year. And so, just
on that, you're 100% right. I mean, the brakes were pumped hard at that point, and it didn't really go back. It was sort of like, okay, and I have a feeling that, and again, this feedback still comes in, and I'm not privy to how many of the people that they've lost, they've actually been in touch. It told me a lot, though, that Mark Chipman himself is on the phone talking to people, and maybe this, well, frankly, I agree. This is something not necessarily from the chairman, but from a lot of people that should have happened in the past. But I mean, my take on this is that they realize that this isn't the time to really hammer on this. We need to take care of our own house first and be far more prepared moving forward to try to convince the people that they've recognized their missteps, they've made changes, they've done what they can do to satisfy some of the concerns or complaints of people. Time will tell whether they've done that, but I think you're exactly right that the brakes were pressed hard on that. They moved forward, and unfortunately, we saw very early this season, after the first couple of games, of what had happened, of the erosion of that season ticket base, and now it's back to both, not hide from the fact that they need to get back to where they were, but hopefully have a much better plan in place to actually execute that, connect with fans that they've lost, new ones as well, and get going back in the right direction.
Well, and I think that's the interesting part, Huss. That's happening right now, right? Like they are putting the work in. They are, Mark Chipman is making those phone calls. Now, to your point, probably should have been making those phone calls to people to thank them for having their season tickets for 5-10 years, not asking them why they're gone. But still, work's being done there. But they're seeing their numbers climb. They're seeing their numbers improve from earlier in the season, which makes the whole thing a bit curious to me, right? I mean, I think there's a couple things at play here, because I'd be curious to know, and this is the part that is missing in all this, is what did the Jets lose last year? Like, are they losing money year in and year out? Because the Jets, I think early on, were part of the teams with the equalization payments. Were a have team, I think, just barely. Like, they weren't taking money from the league pot, and now I think they are. And so I think taking money from the league pot actually decreases the money that you're losing. So if you lose X amount of money, you're still losing money, but you're losing less money. So I'm curious, after all said and done, what actually the Jets lost last season. And I think, I think because Gary Bettman's getting involved, is the last thing that he needs is a hockey mad town being part of the taking groups in the NHL, right? He's got all these U.S. cities that aren't getting the gate revenue and yada, yada, and are falling under that threshold and are actually getting, money back from the league. Gary Bettman doesn't want the Winnipeg Jets to be a team like that. What's next? Edmonton, another Canadian team? Like, Canadian teams shouldn't be in there. So I think they're trying to nip something in the bud right now. But I go back to my original point, like, how much money was lost, and how long can you wait before you start, panicking a little bit, talking about like things won't work, right? Like, we're 2 years, when I say 2 years, I know we're not out of a pandemic, but we're out of heavy pandemic restrictions, right? So we're only that many out. And I mean, this number's been tossed around like this. The True North, I mean, Mark Chipman bought this team and David Thompson bought this team for $170 million. I mean, it's $700 million now. So, the True North gets a lot of tax breaks from the governments. They do a lot of work. They do more than arguably anybody to revitalize the city, to make Winnipeg, to put Winnipeg on the map with you. And Mark Chipman deserves all that credit and more for being, you know, pioneering, being the leader in that group to do that. But they get tax breaks. They get more than anybody from the government. So I'm wondering why now, why this, and if there isn't bigger things at play. And I'm not trying to get all speculative or anything, but I've talked to people in hockey circles who have been wondering the same thing. Like, is there a bigger issue at play here? I mean, where's David Thompson in this? What's his involvement? Like, is True North singular able to run this team? Like, there's all these things that I start thinking about when you start looking at the long-term future of the Winnipeg Jets, and not just short-term right now. What is at play here? Ownership, obviously, like that relationship, has that changed? These are questions that I think, you know, when you hear people going, well, why isn't there a Q&A? Why isn't there an opportunity for people outside of Toronto that get, you know, the Jets work with as their broadcast partners to, you know, this is the story, this is what we want, this is the, you know, if Mark Chipman didn't like that story, it ain't being printed. That's my point. So like the reality is like, why don't we know those answers? Why do we know what the Jets are losing? Why do we only hear about the money that's being made and about the money that, you know, is being, you know, that the team has grown and all this stuff that you would think would cover some of those losses in the short term? Why are we having this conversation now? And I think that the fact that we you know, we know all the other stuff, we know that business with, you know, were an issue. The corporate side, you know, that was the Jets doing too. They didn't save enough money for corporate money to be, you know, it was all fans for the most part, where that drive to 13-5 or whatnot. We know that the corporate world needs to give more. We know that, you know, if the city wants to be an NHL team, they have to, you know, sell out the building or come close to it. We knew all this. What we don't seem to know are some of the more serious questions about, again, how much are the Jets losing? What is the future plan for them? How stable is ownership? Like, why are we getting to a point now where we're talking about, you know, the potential?
I'll tell you why. Because there was 3,000 and 4,000 empty seats at the start of the year. And I think everyone has known this entire time, and this doesn't go back and doesn't change. Nothing has changed. This team can be a member of the National Hockey League and can be the center of activity for half the year for a good portion of our population if the seats are full. And listen, I think that there were warning signs, and I've talked about this before on the program. There were warning signs, and I know this particularly as a season ticket holder all of these years, you know, a few years ago, kind of heading into the pandemic. And I've said that the pandemic in a lot of ways sort of just pushed this down the road, kicked the can, if you will. Like, I think that if the pandemic never happened, we're not in the situation we are right now, but we were already seeing the erosion. And to be honest with you, Jeff, a lot of it, ironically, came out of the 2017-18 playoff run, which was the height of the entire franchise and the most exciting time we've ever had since returning to the National Hockey League. And you want to know what the summer was like around this city? People were broke because the cost
maxing out their credit cards to go to a Western
big time. And I think that ended up hitting the season ticket base the next year. And again, I think there were a lot of people that thought, well, I'm going to have to step back. But people that are definitely emotionally and invested in this team that realize it kind of does take everyone, that step back knowing, well, hey, listen, at least there's a 3,000 seat waiting list, and I know these seats are going to be gone, and, you know, didn't feel like they were sort of walking away and it was going to have a tangible negative impact. But you add that up, and listen, we don't need to go over all of this, but I mean, they didn't do themselves a lot of favors in a lot of different ways. And we're hearing more of that. And I think Mark copped to that as well in that article with Chris. I mean, the most key statement in the entire thing was, you know, the change of the organization, going from a sales organization to a service organization. And Mark saying, and to be honest, we weren't a very good one. So, and I think that's what a lot of people frankly needed to hear. People, you know, the ones that still have the ability to be there, that for whatever reason step back, that felt they weren't treated properly. I mean, to me, and I said this, you know, after the third game of the season, when we were all there for the LA game and we're hit like, you know, a punch in the face with, you know, how many empty seats there were in that building, that a lot of that work had to be done on that side. But I mean, to be honest and frank, the reason why this is happening right now, and I think they wanted to do it last year, but to your point, realized that maybe they didn't have all their ducks in a row to really go forth. And I see T. Will saying, well, this is a threat. You can call it a threat. I call it a fact that we've known since the team came in that, if this team lags, you're the smallest market. If you have the smallest building and you have a massive chunk of your inventory in a seat where 44% of your revenue is ticket revenue, it is going to be really tough. And to your point about David Thompson, I mean, my understanding is that he had been a supporter. He believed in the vision that, Mark and True North had for this city and what it could be done. And he signed up to be a partner in this, knowing that they were the stewards of it, but he would be there, obviously as a partner that could help make it happen. But I mean, he's not in this city. If the city shows that they're not really that into it and all of a sudden there's 10,000 people a night instead of 15, like, I'm not sure David Thompson is just going to be the guy that says, hey, I don't mind losing $20 million a year. Like, he didn't get to be the richest man in Canada by basically cutting checks for that sort of thing going forward. So I think that's where some of the urgency and internal, if you want to call it panic, has happened the last little while, because it's pretty simple. This works if they're at a certain level. That level's not being hit right now. And to their point, I think why this is a good time to do it, but it has to come with an acknowledgement of some of the things that weren't right beforehand with the way that they handled their biggest stakeholders and investors, season ticket holders, is that we do have a great team right now. I'd argue the most likable team we've had in a long, long time. There's a very bright future with some of the young players that are coming in here. There's a lot of really good things happening, but this is the albatross that if it doesn't get solved, all of that could be in jeopardy long term, and we can call it a threat. I don't think they want to put it out that way, but I think it is important for everybody to know that, that to quote Mark, where they're at right now just isn't sustainable.
Right. And I think they're getting way ahead of the message, right? Like, I mean, that's what I was suggesting about the timing. Like, I don't think, like, the Jets aren't on the brink of bankruptcy, right? Like, it's just, they don't want to have more seasons like this. And they see the trends, they see the, you mentioned that, part of that redo, right? Part of that, what did we mess up last spring? What is it that we didn't say? Oh, right. We didn't say it was our fault. Right? That's the one part that was glaringly missing. So of course, it's the one quote that everyone's pulling out, what changed from last spring to this year? Not much. So, but anyway, the reality is, I mean, again,
well, it got worse. It got way worse. I mean, we didn't have the number of empty seats last year that we had this year. And and I think they were trying to get ahead of it at that point, but didn't have it all. I mean, didn't have that plan, I think, as they heard from people over and over altogether. And, I think everybody hopes that that is the case now and that they can move forward. But, and I'll speak to this from my experience working in that industry. If you're able to maintain a sold out building and have that scarcity of the ticket and the demand, you're set. The minute you lose that, you were behind the 8 ball. And unfortunately, that is what happened. And I mean, listen, there's been mistakes that have been made. We've talked about it. We'll continue to, I'm sure, mention it. It'll come back from fans. But allowing it to get to that point and maybe not even realizing the direction that it was going through hubris or whatever has put them in this situation. And believe me, this is serious, because like, for a long time, why did everyone have seats? Why was everyone in on sharing seats? Well, they knew they'd have them. They knew they'd have the best seats possible, and they were committing it to it beforehand. If all of a sudden you can just jump online half an hour before the game and get a pretty cheap ticket and whatnot, that is terrible for maintaining your season ticket base. And that is just a real life part of the entertainment industry and business. If a concert comes and you know it's going to sell it right away, you're geeked and in there and you're doing what you have to do, and you'll get your tickets and figure it out later. If there's going to be 5,000 seats in a 15,000 seat building, you can wait, no problem. Maybe things will go up. I mean, there is that. It's the part of the scarcity of the ticket that they've lost. And again, a big part of that was because of the connection to the team that for a number of reasons, lost with some people. And I think they're working very hard right now to reverse that, get it back. And if that doesn't happen, I guess we'll have that conversation. I think everyone hopes that they do a good job of that. And we're not here having similar conversations for the next couple seasons about the inability to get back to where they needed to be.
Let's put it this way. Nobody wants the Winnipeg Jets to leave, but nobody's more responsible for that than the Winnipeg Jets organization. And so while they certainly need the help of individual season ticket holders, and, kudos to all those people that held on for as long as they could, that maxed out their credit cards, that decided to go to Winnipeg Jets games instead of warm vacations, all the sacrifices that were made with all those tickets prices. There is some onus, obviously, on corporations to give, to have to support the local NHL team that helps their businesses, that puts their city on the map, that makes them, whatever you want to make the argument for what the Jets do for the economy, and which is obviously significant. But it's also, and this isn't even a but, it's just the work needs to be done from True North's side. What does it say that Mark Chipman already addressed the business community in Winnipeg and nothing changed? Something's got to give, like a lot of individual fans.
Do we know? That's kind of all happened this year. I don't know that they haven't had, in fact, and again, this goes back.
The whole thing was tailored towards corporations. That was to me, this whole, if you will, second wave of appealing to ticket buyers.
But this sort of work doesn't happen overnight. You can't just go in and expect that you're going to talk for 30 minutes at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon and all of a sudden the problem's over. It's one thing to get that message out. It's another thing to have the human resources, the salespeople, the service people to go in and connect with these people and get it done. Gone are the days of 2011 when everyone just goes online and goes, send, here's my credit card number, we're sold out. All right, see you in October. And I think they're learning that, and we've learning it the hard way, unfortunately.
13 years later.
Yeah. Well, let's face it, this is very, very different. And again, if you want to get down to why we're here, they didn't do a very good job. Mark owned it. With servicing people, I can tell you, as a season ticket holder for a long time, it was just, here's my email.
That's whatever. But what do you mean? What's owning it mean to you? Is owning it saying we weren't that good of a?
Absolutely.
All right.
We've made some missteps. We made some mistakes. Basically.
So then now what? Now what? Made some mistakes. So now what's the plan? So we made some mistakes. So now we're gonna change course. We're gonna do things different, and we've learned from our mistakes, and now we're going to.
Well, now you'll hopefully give our organization and our team another opportunity to come back and get back to where we need to be, and we'll hopefully stay with you. That essentially is the ask. Right. It is, and if you wanted to have it as simple, I'll paraphrase it. We screwed up, but we need you. If this is going to work, give us another opportunity to earn your trust, your business, and get on board with the Winnipeg Jets. And, let's have a great competitive team. Let's have great atmosphere at full games.
That sounds better than my bad.
Like we remember.
That sounds better than my bad.
Yeah.
I don't remember reading that.
I'm paraphrasing. And I think, and I said this before, I think those are the conversations that, you can kind of go out and say something like that. And really, I think unfortunately, there's no one in that organization other than Mark Chipman that can say that. And at this point, he's the chairman. He's in his 60s. Like a lot of other teams, and again, I don't want to point any fingers here, but would have leadership underneath Mark that would be able to go and have that stroke, even with the business community and whatnot. And I don't think that is the case. And I think that he's frankly been maybe to a detriment focused on the hockey team and the hockey operation more than a lot of the things that was happening technically on his watch. I have no doubt at all.
That's what I'm saying. So if that's the case, bring in an auditor, bring in people to evaluate what your organization is doing in 13 years. You spent a great decade of not having to service anybody, of telling people who wanted to renew tickets, the obstacles you would put up because of the waiting list you had, the obstacles you would put up to people who had already spent money for 4, 5, 6 years, the obstacles you put up. Why? Why wouldn't you want to retain those people? Oh, we don't. I have stories that people wouldn't even call people back because they knew, and they would outright say, we already have people on the waiting list, we'll take that over. So bring in an auditor. Why is it that you're losing that many fans? Why is it that you can't get the business? How many people are doing what job?
I think we just answered that question. I mean, like, that's the thing. And I don't know whether you need an actual auditor or, I mean, listen, there's been a lot of self-reflection inside those walls about how they got to where they're at. And stuff that was maybe obvious to some of us on the outside, or some of us that had season tickets, still have season tickets, I think could have told them that, but I don't think they were very good at listening for a long time. But again, I know, but I mean, so what are we going to do? Just talk about everything that they did bad in the first 10 years? I mean, that's not going to get us anywhere.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not. It's like I need to counter. I'm with you, man. I'm with you. I think that the future, we all need to be a part of it in a certain way. The city of Winnipeg is better with the Jets in it. So I'm not saying, again, all those things. Like, people need to step up to the plate. People need to step up to the plate. But the Winnipeg Jets need to step up to the plate more than anybody else of those groups. Show that you'll step up to the plate. Show what you just said, that trust us. Give us another chance. We messed up, okay? We might even have taken you for granted for all those years. Well, the excitement of hockey was here. We messed up. We should have been more loyal to you. Let us make it up to you. Let us prove to you that if you come back to us, this is a city and a team that you can have respect for, that you can be a part of. That's the part that's missing. And I think that's all Winnipeggers want. I think people would come and go. And I think there's lots of people who, we talk about the corporate world. We might not have the biggest business industries we're not the Silicon Valley of the prairies. Okay. We don't have these, but we do have big companies, and those big companies actually do support the Jets significantly. But what we have in Winnipeg and Manitoba are people who have small businesses. People who make good money, who have the kind of money that allows them to support their families and do significantly more. It's why aren't they coming? You know what I mean? What is the incentive for them? And so I think that there really is a ticket base here. This whole idea, we're not a hockey town, that we can't have people, that are going to set up and step up to the plate. Winnipeg steps up to the plate all the time. Okay. All we ask in return is that you do the same thing. And I think, we're seeing that from the Winnipeg Jets. We're seeing that from Mark Chipman. We're seeing him on the phone. We're starting to see that happen. Let's just see how that continued work, what that turns into. Hopefully this new campaign has inspired some people and hasn't alienated anybody, has inspired some people to go do that and then continue to get the work done, because you can't do this in February next year. You know what I mean? So
it is when we're talking about the investment that it takes individual businesses, people like me, to make those investments, which is significant for the entire year. There's a lot more. Well, as I said, I'm never canceling my tickets because the team sucks. I kind of, this is something that I prioritize. It gives me a lot of benefits, as many other people do. I'm willing to invest in that to have that team. But for a lot of those other people, it really comes down to this. You can tell everyone that it's not going to work at the level that it's at right now, and I think everyone realizes that. But there is an element of earning back the goodwill of some people that were alienated before and bringing them on board. And listen, that is sort of where we're at tomorrow, and it'll be interesting to hear what the commissioner has to say and where this goes from here. But it certainly is in all of our best interests if they figure it out, get it done, work out, and move forward in a direction. Listen, we've gone super long, but I cannot have you on without quickly changing gears over to the CFL. I know you were tweeting about this beforehand. And it's funny. The CFL sort of comes off of the people's radars in a lot of markets, not necessarily here in the off season. But man, this report came out last week and I have not heard a lot about it. Can you just quickly give us the Cole's notes on this lawsuit to the Toronto Argonauts involving the reigning MOP, Chad Kelly?
Cole notes on the face of the CFL having a harassment claim, against the athletic trainer.
And the way the Argos handled it. I mean, this is a I would assume this would be a massive story going forward. And I mean, listen, I can tell you if this happened in Winnipeg, it would be a massive front page story for a number of days. Maybe not so much in Toronto, but this is a big fire for the CFL.
Yeah, massive. They definitely weren't anticipating this one when Toronto signed Chad Kelly to a 3-year deal worth $1.685 million, making him the highest paid player and ultimately the face of the league in the biggest market. No, they weren't anticipating that a year later he would be accused. And let's be clear about something right now. The allegations haven't been tested in court. The Argos, last time I checked, Chad Kelly hadn't put in a statement of defense. So we do have the one side, if you will, right now. So that's important to mention. We'll see what happens here, whether this goes the distance in the courts or it gets settled out. Again, only time will tell that. But the reality is that, I mean, there's lots of things in these allegations that are troubling, right? There's lots of them. I mean, there's just the fact that this could happen. I mean, look, I think, there's a lot of different personalities, characters, attitudes in a locker room, right? And I've been in many different locker rooms. You don't hear the greatest things. Now, I'm not going to suggest you hear ruthless things, and I would also argue that of the 12 years I've been covering professional sports, I'd say it's only gotten better and more improved as time went on. And so, but then to see something like this happen, it's just, I can only really speak to the Bombers situation. I'm not saying things don't happen in Winnipeg. I think things happen all, across the CFL, things that that don't either get reported or don't get found out. Maybe not to this degree, but anyways, my point is that there's so many parts of this that don't make sense to me. Like, and by don't make sense, anger me. They make sense. Is that, well, first off, you have a working environment where, it's so difficult for women in sports already. And so to have these allegations made against a guy who should know better, and I say know better lightly because Chad Kelly has a history of ridiculous behavior, of being a spoiled brat, and simply put, thinking the rules don't apply to him. And so that history in and of itself is troubling. I've had a big investigation at our paper when Johnny Manziel was being accepted into the CFL with all his history, including a history of domestic violence. And I don't, he wasn't vetted at all. That's what I revealed in my investigation. And Chad Kelly, people were too happy to celebrate this name recognition, Jim Kelly's nephew, and nobody really, it seemed, from media to the CFL seemed to identify that Chad Kelly was this guy who all the way along, right? Whether he was in Clemson in 2012, he demanded that he be the starter there, or quit the team. He got in a fight with the coaching staff on the sidelines over a 4th down call, which led to him getting kicked off the team. He went to Ole Miss. He committed to Ole Miss before I think he even played a game. He was back home in Buffalo and got in an issue where he punched a bouncer and was threatening to take an AK-47 and spray the place up. And there's a video online. He just looks like the most privileged human being.
He's an idiot.
Like an idiot, exactly. And then he gets drafted by the Denver Broncos. With the Mr. Irrelevant with the 253rd overall, and literally got that pick and he was a talented guy. He was a Rose Bowl MVP. Like, he was a good player, much like Johnny Manziel was. And so but he only got drafted because Jim Kelly called John Elway, and John Elway took him with the last pick and said, "We trust that young Chad will come in here and he knows what's at stake."
I mean, that was the funny.
And then how did he get kicked off the team? He got wasted one night and then went into
Von Miller's Halloween party.
Yeah,
he went to Von Miller's Halloween party, got so plowed that he ended up walking into the wrong house, arrested for trespassing.
Exactly. And so there's all these things, right? And so I'm not like, a lot of people look at me and go, yeah, you're the cynical guy. You always look at the negative. I'm not saying that Chad Kelly shouldn't have come in, but he should have gone through similar vetting. And so now here we are 2 years later, pretty much his ideal timeline for screwing up, to be honest with you. If you want,
guess what? That's how you end up in the CFL. Screw up the way he did in the National Football League.
And then to actually do something with the opportunity to come in your first year off the bench and and showcase your skill in that drive that helped the Argos beat the Bombers. Then the next year, you follow that up with a 16-2 record. You set a new CFL single-season franchise record. You get the contract. You become the guy. And then here we are. We're talking about you abusing your powers, abusing relationships here with internal staff. And then aside from that, I mean, if what's true, if she went to John Murphy, which if I had I'm going to be careful here, but if I had a list of 1,000 people, it wouldn't even make it for who I would go to for these issues. He wouldn't even be on my list. But I'm just saying that, for him to allegedly say, you've opened up a can of worms, let me remind you guys, this is the same guy who quietly got reinstated last season after getting terminated, after getting into a physical altercation and saying a homophobic slur at the end of the East Final in 21. And so you're like, this guy's here. And the crazy thing is, so if, say we're assuming there might be some consequences here. There should be some consequences here, of course, if this is true. Michael Pinball Clemens is not the talent evaluator in Toronto. He is not the guy who is going to find the players that are going to make up for the max exodus of players that they have, right? It's going to be John Murphy. And so he now needs to, what's the future with the organization? There is some significant steps here that need to play out to determine what the future of the Argos franchise is, because it could very well look drastically different when they take the field for training camp.
Hey, we'll have tons of time to talk about that, but just one more on this. About the CFL.
One more thing too, Huss.
Yeah.
Chad Kelly has $100,000 a year in marketing money. So assuming that he actually gets through this and can still play, they need to find $100,000 a year in appearance fees for a guy who's now, shrouded in all this crap. Anyways, you got one last.
It's funny how guys, when they do stuff like that, won't even say it, but a little community service might be good for old Swag Kelly. You did tweet this early on, and this is going to be a real test of, I think, to use your term, the teeth of the CFL's policy on sexual harassment, as well as how teams handle these things internally.
Yeah, it will. And I tweeted that because, and I wrote this last week because I wrote down, I did a breakdown. I spent my whole CFL rundown column last week just on the Chad Kelly stuff. And so this incident, so I wrote last week, I'm convinced that Randy Ambrosie, if you were to ask him to explain his, violence against women policy, gender-based violence policy, that he wouldn't really know exactly what it is. And I say that because I know exactly what it is, because when I did the Johnny Manziel investigation, it was built on the fact that the CFL didn't follow their violence against women policy that was put into place in 2015 under Jeffrey Orridge. And the reality of, and the reason why I say that is because the groundbreaking policy that they brought into play in 2015 again is built on a rehabilitative approach. So in reality, if in an event like this happens, or an event we've seen in the past, where it involves, sometimes criminal activity, just sometimes unfavorable activity, whatever it might be, particularly when it comes to harassment, assault, some of the more serious stuff, the protocol's actually not to just cut and bait and release a player. And that's what we've seen in the past from the CFL, is that they just, whether it was Jerome Messam, boom, yeah, charged, out of here, gone, boom. And so and then Randy then doubles down and almost in a way to puff his chest, says, well, nobody else can register a contract for him. And it's like, okay, if that's what you got, if that's the approach you want to take, zero tolerance, mess around, what's that popular thing, find out, whatever.
FAFO?
Yeah, exactly. Find out. If that's the approach you want to have, all the power to you. But when you've been patting yourself on the back and, heralding this approach that is, to be clear, is backed by all domestic violence, experts for the most part in this country, at least the top experts, essentially what would happen here is they would bring Chad Kelly in and try to rehabilitate him, do an investigation, talk to him about what he did wrong, get him, there's all these different steps in place. And I'm not saying that the end result wouldn't be terminating the contract or banning from the CFL, yada, yada. But that also is related to how you handle the process. So if Chad Kelly was to come in and say, screw you guys, blah, 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 I'm not doing this, yeah, he'll probably end up leaving. It might be different, might not be, if he was to take that approach, took some ownership, yada, yada, yada. Again, we're talking about things that aren't factual yet, but it is an interesting element of this, is that up to now, I haven't seen Randy Ambrosie over several occasions execute the policy that he has in place. So my tweet had to do a lot with that. I'm interested now that what's going to happen here. And watch this. It won't be a quick no. And it's not because all of a sudden Randy's now read the policy and knows it. It'll be because he's dealing with Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, a group that is very difficult in his position to say no to, and will certainly want Chad Kelly on their team, assuming that it's not too bad, right? I shouldn't be speaking for MLSE. Maybe they don't want him if it all turns out whatever. But they really wanted Chad Kelly for that international appeal, right? This is the same group that was on board with the XFL stuff, which was kind of leading that during that time where we were talking about merging those leagues. They liked the international appeal of Chad Kelly. So that's kind of what I meant on that. A, following it, and then B, how they plan to interpret it based on which team is going to be needing it.
Well, this is just the start, I think, of a story that will dominate a lot of CFL circles conversations as we get closer to training camp coming up in the season. These chats with you are always awesome. This is right up there with one of our best. Thanks again. Thanks for the extra time as we got rolling on this one, and have a good one. We'll talk to you over the course of the week, and I look forward to doing this again next week on WST.
Yeah, right on, Huss. Always a good opportunity, hashing up and chopping up the different things that come our way. Living
love
in this
it, buddy. Love
place.
it. Great stuff. There's Jeff Hamilton. Of course, you're probably already following him, but make sure you are. If you're not at Jeff K. Hamilton, you can read all of his work in the pages of the Winnipeg Free Press. Well, we got going pretty long there. But listen, it was well worth it. It was a great conversation on a number of topics that I think are quite prudent. As we see, we're well over 500 in the chat. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Thanks to everyone that already subscribed. Got us to 11,000 on the weekend, and we pushed forward to 12. And we did hit our goal in getting it in time for our third anniversary coming up a week Friday, which will be a special show, not just for the anniversary, but for the NHL trade deadline. Of course, great CFL segment there. All of our Bomber reports brought to you by Princess Auto, a wonderful supporter and sponsor of ours. And, of course, the big sponsor of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Now the home of the Bombers is Princess Auto Stadium. And we can't wait to get to those Princess Auto tailgate parties before Blue Bomber football next year. Shout out to Dalton Schoen, by the way, for coming on the program today. Great to see him mixing and mingling with so many Bomber fans over the course of the weekend. Princess Auto, in addition to doing everything they do here in the city, headquartered in Winnipeg, is the place where you'll find the best deals on the most unique assortment of tools and equipment around. Everything you need to complete the projects on your list or start something new is at Princess Auto. Pop by and see them online or in-store today. And again, you can shop 24/7, 365 at princessauto.com. Winnipeg locations, Panet Road and Portage Avenue West. Big cheers to our friends over at Little Brown Jug. Quite a few generics enjoyed on the weekend by Jet fans I saw yesterday for a Sunday afternoon game. That was rocking. Great crowd, great atmosphere as well. And whether it's 5 o'clock on a Friday or a Tuesday night, whenever you're looking for a great beer, Little Brown Jug has so many options, including their flagship brands, 1919 and Generic Lager, which are available as part of the local offerings at Canada Life Center. Pop by and see them, William Avenue on the tap room, and look for Generic Lager $19.99 for 8 packs of Tall Boys at your local beer store or Manitoba Liquor Marts. And a shout out to the gang at Royal Sports. They're already getting ready for spring, but in the meantime, ready for Blue Jays season, new Jays gear coming in by the day, Super Bowl championship merchandise for the Chiefs, and the biggest and best selection of Jets gear just in time for playoffs, and of course, Bomber gear for those of you looking ahead to next season. In addition, the biggest and best deals on hockey equipment, sticks, and more in town. Snowboards, boots, bindings ahead of spring break, and probably your best way, follow them on Instagram at Royal Sports Pembina for the latest merchandise drops, sale information, and for all your sporting needs, head on down to Royal Sports at 750 Pembina Highway. All right, we've gone a little bit long, but I think if you're still with us right now live, you're going to love this next conversation. Al's brother himself, Michael Distefano, joins us now to talk about the incredible record-breaking sale of the found sealed case of O-Pee-Chee 7980 rookie hockey cards, which include the Wayne Gretzky rookie. AB, Michael, welcome to Winnipeg Sports Talk. It's great to have you on for the first time.
Oh, thank you. Happy to be on. It was a wild weekend in the sports card world, a wild weekend in the hockey world. So lots to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm sure you and the rest of Leafs Nation is pretty fired up. Although we actually have to thank you for beating the Avalanche on the weekend, getting the Jets a little closer to being all alone in first place in the Central Division. And by the way, just before we get into this crazy story about the collectibles, incredible playoff performance. People are already wondering about the tremendous information. A lot more tremendous information at the end, but you did make Luke Wilson and O-Dog sweat after that big lead towards the end of the year.
Yeah, we made a strong push at the end of the regular season. Obviously, we went on a nice little run there, but we got hot at the wrong time in terms of the regular season. But then come playoff time, we knew we had to buckle down, and we got cooked up some tremendous information and rode it all the way to a victory. So I can't really say that we were perfect in the playoffs, but we were better than them, and that's all that matters. That's really all that matters.
You know what? We will all look forward to football season getting going again, and you guys doing your picks and having fun. But it is also obviously great to see you back doing stuff with the station and the Overdrive guys. Tell us about, before we get into this story, fill us in on what you're doing with the hockey news. The collectible world has, it's continued to grow year over year, but the pandemic had seemed to take a massive spike, and you're kind of seemingly covering it and following it all with the hockey news.
Yeah, this past summer, I got in touch with, the editor-in-chief over there right now. Michael Trakos reached out to me, and he said that they were looking to start up a collectibles site for the hockey news, and was asking if I had interest. He had known that I was, a card collector myself, and that I had, gone to shows, and I had been a big advocate for card collecting, and was wondering if I'd be interested in taking over the site as the manager. And I said, yeah, sounds like something I'd totally be interested in doing. So been doing it for a couple of months now. And it's been a lot of fun, obviously, getting to write for the hockey news. Growing up, I always had a subscription. It was like one of the things on my Christmas list every year was a new subscription to the hockey news. So, now being able to work and provide coverage for it is pretty awesome. And to be doing it in hockey cards is something that I never thought that I would be able to do, a passion of mine since I was a little kid. So it's pretty sweet.
Obviously Reem's just firing up some of these pictures. You still fire up the table at some of the card shows and still get in on these card streets with the rest of the collectors?
Absolutely. I'm on the ground floor, right? Boots on the ground out there. I was at a card show this past weekend on Saturday up in Richmond Hill, just perusing the floor myself, looking for some good deals, looking for some steals, doing the old bartering. And I like to set up also at least once a month. Like my hometown of Niagara and St. Catharines, they usually have a monthly card show that I like to set up at. I've known the owners of the card show of the store for years. So I used to do it way back before the pandemic, and then got back into card collecting more heavily during the pandemic, along with a lot of people, and have dumped a decent amount of money into the hobby. But it's just a really, really fun thing to do. It's for me, one of the funnest hobbies that I have.
Hey, let me just, before we get into this crazy case story, Connor Bedard is the, we believe could be, one of those generational players. his first cards come out, I guess, in the Upper Deck Series 2. What's the latest on Bedard collectibles, especially his rookie card right now, and what's that done to the industry in the last little while?
It's insane. Yeah, you're right. His Young Guns, which is the flagship rookie card of every player, is set to come out next week, March 6th. So it's going to be a rat race to get that card. Everybody is anticipating this is going to be an expensive one at that. It's interesting what it's done to the market, though, I would say, because we've seen cases and boxes get a lot more expensive than usual. So, just to take a peek behind the curtain, I am curious to see if that's going to cause some people to leave the hobby, break open less boxes, and then is that going to impact the amount of supply of cards, therefore make it more expensive? It's actually going to be a very interesting case study over the next year or so to see what happens with this series too. But it's definitely going to be a very, very highly sought after card because Connor Bedard is just a freak in nature. Like, this guy is unbelievable, and everyone's going to want to get a piece of it. In Series 1, they had like an Easter egg card that came out in the set, and that was going for like $1,000. So the anticipation is that this Young Guns could potentially go for in and around that price as well on release day.
Yeah, it is going to be, well, listen, we'll definitely pay attention to it. Maybe we'll get you back on to talk about it, as we kind of get in and see where the market goes. We do want to talk to you about, you've got a piece in the Hockey News right now, and we'll throw up the link in the chat so people can go read it. We heard, what was it, a few months ago, about somebody finding a sealed case of 1979-80 OPG hockey cards, which, of course, is the Wayne Gretzky rookie year. This, like, as far as card collecting goes, specifically to hockey, this really is the holy grail, isn't it, Michael?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, this is exactly like, to find this is unbelievable. It's the only known sealed case in the world at this point, and it was found in little old Regina, Saskatchewan. The story goes that family was just kind of cleaning out some boxes down in the basement. I believe the father, who had collected for years, had passed away, and they're just kind of cleaning out all these boxes. And they were under the impression that it was actually, because it says 1980 on the box, so they thought it was 1980-81. And someone said, I would double check if I were you. And they kind of peeled back the top layer a little teensy bit and noticed that the boxes were white. Well, the 1980-81 boxes were blue. It was the 79-80 boxes that were white. Lo and behold, that meant that there are 16 boxes of a Wayne Gretzky rookie card year set inside that case. So that instantly made that box worth a couple $1 million more than what they originally thought. And yeah, it finally sold on auction this past weekend. I've been watching it. It was about 3 weeks long, I think the auction was, over at Heritage, and it finally sold for $3.1 million USD plus a buyer's premium. So the final sale price was $3.72 million American, which is roughly 5 million Canadian. Just an astonishing price to pay for some cardboard.
What was that? I mean, I'm not sure whether you knew this, but was that more than what was expected for this to fetch? Or, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people had done some numbers as to what this thing is worth. And yeah. I mean, there's a lot of speculation in it because, of course, these are unopened boxes and unopened packs. But there'll be some Gretzky's in there.
Yeah, so it is a little bit more than I think most people were anticipating. I think the expected value was to come in and around the $2-ish million mark. So it went for over $3 million. So it definitely did go over the mark that people thought it would. So based on the set, there's estimates that there could be up to 27 Gretzky rookie cards inside this case. And it's going to be fascinating to see what the owner does, like what the person who purchased this case does. People assume that, this person's just some rich guy who probably is going to want to open it, rip it up for nostalgia purposes, and then try and grade these Gretzky rookies and try and get a PSA 10. but there's only 2 PSA 10s in the world, 2 perfectly graded 10 O-Pee-Chee Gretzky rookie cards. So it's very unlikely that it's in there. And if there is not a ready to go PSA 10 graded Gretzky rookie inside any of those boxes, he will never make his money back. It's not even going to come close to make it back the 3.72 million USD price that he paid for this box. So it's going to be an interesting decision whether this collector who purchased this item keeps it sealed or tries to rip open the only known box of this product.
If you can, I mean, people know, oh, this is Wayne Gretzky, and we know this is the rookie card. But if you can, explain the grading process and why even now there are only 2 10s of the Gretzky rookie from that year.
Sure. So there's also a BGS 10, and then there's an SGC 10, and that gets a little dicey. So we'll PSA, though, is considered like the gold standard when it comes to grading sports cards, and especially vintage sports cards at that. So basically, there's a grade from 1 to 10, and based on either it's how well the card is centered or how well the card, the surface looks, the fading, the coloring. If you'll notice, I see you got it here up on the screen. There's like the red oil drop in the Oilers logo in the bottom right corner. Often that is very off-centered, and it is extremely rare to find one that is centered well. That's one thing that people look for right away, just to see if that is, going to be centered properly. So that's one thing to look at. The corners, is there any white marks? Is there any dings, edges, anything like that? Anytime you see a blemish on a card, it's going to take, part of your grade away. So a card from 1979, it's very unlikely that you're going to find one in perfect condition, even coming out of the package. Like, a lot of people have the assumption that if it's coming from the box, it's coming out of the pack, it's never seen daylight, it must be in perfect condition. It's not the case. There's a strong possibility that there could have been some cutting errors at the factory when it was packed. It could have got crimped wrong somehow, could have got bent in some way. When it was printed and cut on the sheet, could have been cut a little too far to the right, too far to the left, up, down. There's many different problems that could have been had. It could have been printed wrong on the card, like I said. So this looks like actually the oil drop is nicely centered, but there are some that are too high, too low, to the right, to the left. There's a lot of issues that could be happening with any hockey card, and especially some of these more vintage cards. So it's nearly impossible. Like I said, there's been nearly 12,000 of these Gretzky cards that have been graded by PSA, and only 2 of them have come back a PSA 10. So it's extremely unlikely that there is a PSA 10 copy waiting in one of these boxes. And like I said, unless that happens, and he somehow finds the third known to man inside there, it's unlikely that the cost will be recouped.
Any idea what the value is of those 2 PSA 10 Gretzkys right now?
Yeah, so one sold in 2021. That's the last known sale of it. Went to sale on auction. I believe it was also through Heritage, I believe. And it sold for $3.5 million US. So that's what you're hoping for. If you're going to open this box, it's got to have a PSA 10 Gretzky in there, or else you're not gonna see that money back, and not even close. Even a 9, I think, goes for like $150,000. Like, there's that big of a drop in a PSA 10 and a PSA 9.
I mean, these cards were made over 40 years ago. They've been in the packs. They have been in sealed boxes, but they've been in a pack with a stick of gum. I can't imagine the state of the gum, to be honest, coming out of these packs right now. But
not something I'd be taking a chunk at.
Do the cards, like, is there any worry about the cards just not being the same as you would remember them because of time? Like, it's still in the packs?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's possible that there could be some warp to these cards as well. You don't really know until you open them up. I have never personally been able to experience opening up one of these 40-year-old packs before, so I don't have firsthand experience, but I'm sure there are examples of cards that, weren't packed away properly or stored properly, and maybe some moisture got into the box somehow and seeps into the packaging of wax, and they could open up these cards and these boxes, and there could be something inside. It might not be as perfect as we think. So it certainly is possible, but you wouldn't really know until you open it up. It could be perfect too. Like it's not out of the question that they will be in as close to pristine condition as you can get.
Oh, that beautiful back of the 7980 OPG with the skate and the guy at the top. It was I was really, really, I think many, if you were around, if you're alive at that time, or even, growing up at all in the 80s, those cards were around. But I think there was a lot of people that had them in their bike spokes and whatnot to make it sound like a motorcycle, thinking
that's the old story. That's the old story. I remember, because this is before my time. I'm a 90s baby, so this is far before my time. And I remember my uncle, though, telling me, I used to have 5 of those, but I put them in my bike spokes, me and my friends. I'm like, you should have put it in plastic and slabbed it, and today it could be worth thousands of dollars. So what happens as kids is interesting. My generation did the same thing with Pokemon cards, and I don't know if you know the Pokemon market these days. It's not quite as robust as $3.5 million Gretzky's, but it's quite expensive as well. And that stuff that I just played with and got dirty and got all ripped up, and now it's not worth nearly as much as it did.
Let me just chime in for a second. I had so many. Yeah, we lost all of them. I had all the Hollows first edition. Like we had. I'm getting anxiety when seeing the price charts of those.
Well, I know Logan Paul bought one for $5 million, put it on a chain, and wore it at WrestleMania. That was, and just the fact that it was $5 million, I think, tells you all you need to know. Speaking of the money, do we know who bought this and what their intention is going forward now that they're the owner of this sealed case?
Yeah, I haven't seen an update as to who purchased this case. Obviously, Heritage Auctions, they, have. It's up to the buyer if they want it to be known who purchased this case. And so far, I don't believe the identity has been out there, and no one said what their intentions are of this case. But I don't know about you. It'd be tough to have this box sitting in a closet or sitting in a warehouse or wherever this person's going to put it and not be tempted to open this bad boy. It's a piece of hockey history. It's the Holy Grail. And there could be, like I said, as many as 27 Wayne Gretzky rookie cards that you can pull pack fresh. The thrill, the rush of being able to do that would be awesome. However, it's also something that you could keep and hold sealed and use it as an investment, and maybe it sells for $4.5 million in 10 more years from now.
Michael, this has been great having you on the program. Obviously, you will be bringing the tremendous information back to Overdrive as you guys get picking games of next football season, but fill people in on where they can find your content with Locked On Leafs, and of course, everything you've got going on with cards and collectibles of the hockey news.
Yeah, so you can find, if you're interested more in the hockey card hobby and community, yes, we've launched a new site over the last couple of months at the Hockey News called the Hockey News Collectible. So it's literally just www.thehockeynews.com/collectibles. And you can also find my personal work. I have a Leafs podcast, Locked On Leafs. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Also, we have a YouTube for video as well. So YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts at. It's Locked On Leafs. We do daily Maple Leafs podcast there.
Hey, listen, we really appreciate you coming on. We'll have to do this again and talk maybe Jets and Leafs at some point. But in the meantime, say hi to Jeff, Brian, and the gang, and all the best. We appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Will do. Thank you for having me.
All right, good stuff with AB. Great to have him on the program. And as they say, the Bedard rookie card comes out, I believe, next week or the week before, is he mentioning? And I was talking with Dustin, who's a big card guy, today on the Lock Shop. May have to get Dusty on to talk about that as we get forward. But there is going to be a hysteria over those cards, and I think some real sticker shock when people sees the price of the boxes when they come out. Listen, we've gone long. Do have to quickly get to the Coolbet lines, but got to thank our friends at Boston Pizza. Man, their wings are so damn good. Had them on the weekend. I feel like getting them again tonight. No better place to check in on the action on the tube and gather with your friends to watch the Jets or the rest of the National Hockey League than your local Boston Pizza with those world famous BP wings, gourmet pizzas, and a couple ice cold schooners as well. Hey, if you are staying at home tonight, you can always get the great taste of Boston Pizza by ordering online at bostonpizza.com. And a shout out to our friends at Aikens Lake Wilderness Lodge. I know it's going to get cold the next couple of days, but you stick your head outside and realize that March is just around the corner and start feeling like spring is going to be here soon. And of course, summer. And that means getting out the water and fishing. And there is no fishing experience in Manitoba like the fly-in Aikens Lake Wilderness Lodge, where you can be on the water in less than 2 hours from the city of Winnipeg. And as world-class as the fishing is while you're at Aikens Lake, the Aikens experience and the hospitality of the Aikens team is even better. Find out more on availability for the 2024 season today at aikenslake.com, and make sure to check out Aikens Lake on all of the social media platforms. We'll also do a Sport Manitoba segment later on this week, courtesy of our friends at Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries. Thanks again for their support of Winnipeg Sports Talk. Had a fun lock shop today with Dusty, kind of recapping the entire weekend. Ugly loss for the Oilers on Saturday night to the Calgary Flames in the Battle of Alberta. And the Oilers are right back at it tonight in a huge game in the Pacific Division, hosting the Los Angeles Kings. Kings playing better as of late, and the Oilers winless in 3 games to start off this homestand. Edmonton is a minus 163 favorite. The Kings are plus 138. Other games tonight, Ottawa is a minus 136 favorite in Washington against the Capitals, who are plus 116 home dogs. The Islanders are plus 145 underdogs in Dallas. The Stars minus 172 on the money line. And the late game is the Boston Bruins coming off their overtime loss to the Canucks. Big win for Vancouver, battling back from a 2-0 deficit in the third, tying it with the goalie pulled and winning it in overtime. Boston's in Seattle. Boston minus 137 favorites, and the Kraken plus 116. Dusty, I know, has an Edmonton Sports Talk parlay for the game tonight, but we did focus in on the other 3 games in the lock shop today. We're taking Ottawa to win, Boston to win, and we're going to take the Islanders plus 1.5 against the Dallas Stars, which is a lot more fun to cheer for as a Jets fan than a Dallas win. So the Stars back at home for 1 game after being on the road for 8 of 10. Big win on Saturday against the Hurricanes. They've got Colorado tomorrow and then Winnipeg on Thursday. So we'll see where the Islanders can keep this one close or even win. That one, when we put it in on the site, was plus 375. It is boosted to plus 425. So if you like Ottawa, Boston, and the Islanders to win or lose by 1, get on with us and ride with the lock shop plus 425 in the Coolbet exclusives right now. We got to get this pod up because we went long, especially with Hammer, but man, that was a great conversation. Thanks again to Rennie for jumping on today. Mickey Canuck himself, Michael Distefano, and of course, Jeff Hamilton for the extended chat. Always love chopping it up with Hammer, and that I think was one of the more interesting ones we've had over the last year or so. Game day tomorrow, the commissioner in town. We will be all over it. Join us tomorrow at 1 o'clock on Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. In the meantime, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Give us a thumbs up. Tell a friend about Winnipeg Sports Talk. And shout out to all the podcast listeners making WST a part of their day as well. Have a great Monday night. 4 games in the NHL. We'll talk about them tomorrow as well. We'll see you at 1 on YouTube to get ready for the Jets and Blues and NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman's visit to Winnipeg. We'll see you then, folks. Thanks for being with us.
Oh my God! Oh! Shut it down! Let's go home!
Thanks for tuning in to Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast feed at winnipegsportstalk.com.